The story began by explaining what adventurers were. Adventurers took on missions from guild branches spread across many countries. They earned a living by completing jobs that offered rewards. Their tasks ranged from slaying monsters and delivering materials to many other dangerous assignments. Some adventurers became famous heroes after defeating deadly dragons that threatened entire nations, while others returned from deep dungeons carrying priceless treasures and riches. In such a world, countless people chased dreams of glory and adventure. At the Adventurers Guild branch in Boltana, a voice called out, "Next, please." The main character, Ark, thought excitedly to himself that their adventure was finally about to begin. As he waited in line, he noticed a nervous voice mutter in panic. Turning toward his childhood friend Lean, Ark gently told her not to be so nervous since it was almost their turn for the appraisal. He asked what was bothering her. Ark grabbed her hand reassuringly. Lean smiled nervously and asked if he was not feeling nervous at all. She admitted that she kept wondering what kind of abilities she would have. Ark stared at her for a moment, stunned by how beautiful she had become. When Lean noticed his silence and asked if something was wrong, Ark quickly brushed it off in embarrassment. He confidently told her that if it was Lean, everything would surely be fine. As he looked at her, Ark recalled their past. Lean had grown up with him in the same village, and they had both dreamed of becoming adventurers ever since they were children. Together, they had left their village to chase those dreams. Deep inside, Ark also carried another dream. Once they earned enough money as adventurers, he wanted to buy a ring and confess his feelings to her. Soon, the staff member called for the next person. Both Ark and Lean immediately turned toward the voice. Lean nervously whispered that it was finally her turn and asked Ark what she should do. Suddenly, Ark suggested that Lean should go first. Lean looked confused, but Ark jokingly claimed that if he turned out to possess some outrageous power, she might feel overshadowed afterward. Smirking proudly, he said he would allow her to enjoy her moment of glory first. Lean muttered in confusion about what he was even talking about, but she eventually stepped forward and agreed to go first. A few moments later, a shocked voice suddenly echoed throughout the guild hall. "What is this?" The woman conducting the appraisal stared at the results in disbelief before shouting that Lean's abilities were at the level of a hero. She announced that Lean's level cap was 80 and that she possessed the skills Sacred Magic, High Priestess, and Goddess's Blessing. Lean stood frozen in confusion as the crowd erupted into shock. Someone shouted that a level cap of 80 was unbelievably high. Another person remarked that priest-type skills were usually around level 30, making Lean's abilities extraordinary. One man excitedly exclaimed that having 3 powerful skills like that was unheard of. The crowd continued praising her, calling her incredible and declaring that she truly had the qualities of a hero. The guild staff smiled warmly and began cheering for Lean. Everyone in the guild encouraged her and expressed their hopes for her future success as an adventurer. Feeling overwhelmed, Lean nervously thanked them all before bowing politely. Her face turned red from embarrassment as she hurried back toward Ark. Meanwhile, Ark remained frozen in shock from the appraisal results. After recovering, he proudly told Lean that she was truly amazing. Lean smiled awkwardly and admitted that the results had surprised her too. Ark brightly declared that Lean was definitely meant to become a priestess. Lean happily agreed before saying that Ark would surely become something impressive as well. After thinking for a moment, she guessed that he would probably become a swordsman or perhaps even a holy knight. Ark confidently told her to leave it to him. Just then, the staff member called for the next person. Excited, Ark stepped forward while Lean cheerfully told him to do his best. Ark casually replied that there was no need for him to try too hard anyway. Standing before the staff member, Ark introduced himself and requested to register as an adventurer. The woman acknowledged him and instructed him to place his hand on the crystal ball for the appraisal. As Ark obeyed, the crowd began whispering among themselves. Some recognized him as the companion of the girl from earlier, while others commented on how young he looked. A few people wondered if he might possess some incredible abilities as well, especially after Lean's shocking results. Ark silently prayed to himself. He knew that everything would be decided at this moment. More than anything, he wished for the power to protect Lean. The woman quietly waited for the crystal's result. Suddenly, her face turned bright red as she struggled to hold back laughter. Ark looked at her in confusion. Trembling from suppressed laughter, the woman apologized before finally announcing his results. His level cap was 1. The entire guild hall fell silent. Then, after a brief pause, the room exploded with laughter. One man shouted in disbelief, asking if a level cap of 1 was even possible. Another claimed he had never heard of such a thing before. Someone else pointed out that Ark's only spell was an instant death magic called Success Unseen. The crowd continued mocking him, calling his abilities bizarre and freakish. One person loudly declared that Ark was the weakest magician in all of humanity. Lean quickly called out to him, snapping him from his stunned thoughts. Worried, She gently suggested that they leave the guild for now. Ark quietly agreed. As they moved to a corner of the guild hall, Ark's mind filled with confusion and frustration. He could not understand why he had been born with such a useless level cap. The words of the crowd echoed painfully in his head. Lean silently watched him, unsure of what to say. Suddenly, a man approached them and casually greeted Lean. Behind him stood several other adventurers. The man introduced himself as Alan, the leader of an S-rank party. Ark's eyes widened in surprise after hearing the name. Alan then turned toward Lean and bluntly asked her to join his party as their priestess. Lean froze in shock. From the crowd, someone immediately reacted in disbelief, asking if this was really the famous Alan's party. The crowd buzzed with excitement as people spoke among themselves. One person asked if they were the group with all the max-level monsters, while another replied in awe that they were the real deal. Someone else added that the party had apparently been entrusted with a mission directly from the king. Another voice commented on the beautiful woman accompanying them, only for someone nearby to quickly tell them to cut it out. As the commotion grew louder, beads of sweat formed on Ark's face. A voice shouted in disbelief that being recruited into an S-rank party so soon after registering was unbelievable. Another person remarked that the kid was truly extraordinary despite being a complete rookie. Lean questioned why they wanted her, pointing out that she was only a level 1 beginner adventurer. Alan then told his party to wait for him outside, assuring them he would be there shortly. Turning back to Lean, he explained that her doubts were understandable, but there was no reason to worry. He confidently stated that if she joined his party, her level would rise rapidly. According to him, they could not help but admire her incredible talent. Meanwhile, Ark clenched his fist tightly as confusion filled his mind. He could not even comprehend what being S-rank truly meant. Alan then asked Lean if she would lend her skills for the sake of the people. Inside his thoughts, Ark immediately rejected the idea. To him, the answer was obviously no. However, Lean silently lowered her gaze and fell deep into thought. Ark stared at her with widened eyes, unable to understand why she looked so troubled. In his mind, he wondered why she did not simply refuse with a single word. Suddenly, memories surfaced within him. In the past, someone had called out to him, shouting his name. Ark had turned toward the voice and answered casually. The person had then asked if he was really going to become an adventurer. Ark had smiled brightly and declared that he absolutely would. Someday, he said proudly, his book would definitely be published. Lean had responded softly, saying that when that day came, he should remember to... Before the memory could continue, Lean's voice shattered Ark's thoughts. She suddenly bowed her head and begged Alan to invite her into his party. Ark froze in complete shock. Alan immediately thanked her and praised her choice as a brilliant decision. Without hesitation, he grabbed Lean by the hand and suggested they quickly prepare her equipment. He enthusiastically explained that he would teach her the proper mindset of an adventurer and personally guide her along the way. Ark's hand trembled violently. Desperately, he called out her name and told her to wait. He reached forward, trying to stop her, but Alan swiftly stepped in and blocked him from grabbing her. Alan looked at him suspiciously and asked who he was. Ark could only stare back in shock. Lean quietly muttered his name, causing Ark to look at her with hopeful eyes as he softly called out to her in return. Alan suddenly smirked as realization crossed his face. He apologized casually, saying he had mistaken Ark for some kind of thug. Resting a hand on Ark's shoulder, Alan mentioned that he had heard the name Ark before and believed he understood the situation well enough. He remarked that it was unfortunate, but in the world of adventurers, such things happened all the time. According to him, it was a common occurrence. Ark struggled to speak, insisting that there had to be some mistake. He shouted that Lean was important to him and reminded her of their promise to travel together. Alan responded with a calm nod, saying that sounded about right. However, with another smug grin, he told Ark that despite everything, Lean was still making the correct choice. Alan asked Ark if he had ever truly thought about what his newfound ability meant. According to Alan, everything in life was predetermined from birth. He explained that these powers were blessings granted by the gods themselves. Ark looked at him with conflicted emotions filling his eyes. Alan continued, saying that among ordinary people, only a select few were born with extraordinary abilities. Those individuals, he claimed, surpassed the limits of normal humans. In his eyes, they were the chosen ones. He further explained that when such gifted people were placed in an environment that fully nurtured their talents, miracles naturally occurred. Alan then questioned Ark directly, asking whether he was truly capable of supporting his friend in such a world. As the conversation ended, Ark remained standing motionless by the door. Alan's words echoed repeatedly inside his mind. He could not stop wondering which kind of future Lean truly belonged in. Nearby, a man quietly whispered, asking how long Ark intended to keep standing there like that. Another replied that it was honestly pitiful to watch. However, he also muttered bitterly about Ark's skill, unable to hide his disgust. Ark clenched his teeth tightly and forced himself to move. In his thoughts, he insisted that it was not over yet. He convinced himself that skills did not matter anyway. The moment he burst through the door, however, someone suddenly slammed into him with overwhelming force, sending him crashing onto the ground. A voice cried out dramatically in pain, while Ark silently gasped as his body hit the floor. When he looked up, his eyes widened in fear. Towering over him was a massive man with an intimidating build. The man glared down at him coldly and ordered him to get out of the way, calling him trash without hesitation. Fear immediately filled Ark's eyes. Nearby, a girl smirked and remarked that the insult was unnecessarily harsh over such a small collision. Another woman laughed cheerfully, questioning whether calling someone trash over bumping into each other was really normal. She then turned toward Ark and pointed out how he was simply standing there frozen. Mockingly, she asked whether he honestly believed he was about to be killed. She casually added that she certainly had not heard anything that serious, ending her sentence with a playful meow. Ark trembled nervously under the pressure. At that moment, another man suddenly noticed the large warrior and pointed him out to the others. Someone asked if that intimidating figure was perhaps being too reckless. Another immediately recognized him as Balzac, the berserker of the S-class. The surrounding people reacted with awe, calling Balzac a monster completely beyond ordinary understanding. Someone else whispered that his voice alone was terrifyingly loud and wondered if speaking carelessly around him would get someone killed. Another questioned why a warrior like Balzac had even come all the way to Voltana in the first place. One man then brought up Alan from earlier, commenting that there was something suspicious about him. He asked a woman named Emmy for her opinion. Emmy replied bluntly that they clearly understood nothing at all. Meanwhile, Balzac himself looked irritated and barked that the entire situation was annoying. He demanded that everyone hurry up and finish their business immediately. The playful woman responded by asking whose fault the chaos was in the first place, again ending her remark with meow. Using the distraction as an opportunity, Ark quickly got back to his feet. Someone gasped in surprise as the woman suddenly shouted that he had escaped. Another man laughed and wondered what Ark's problem had even been in the end. The crowd burst into laughter as Ark slipped away into the sea of people. Suddenly, another gasp echoed through the area, causing Ark to instinctively turn around. He realized that countless eyes were staring directly at him. Their gazes were cold, mocking, and filled with contempt. Whispers spread throughout the crowd like poison. Weakest, trash, incompetent. Unable to bear it any longer, Ark shouted desperately for them to stop. Yet another voice repeated Alan's earlier question, asking if he was truly capable of handling such a reality. Completely overwhelmed by the stares and ridicule, Ark finally turned around and ran. As he fled, someone behind him muttered in confusion, wondering what exactly was wrong with him. Eventually, Ark ran all the way toward the forest. Ark panted heavily as nervousness filled his eyes. After being glared at by the dark and intimidating man earlier, his memories had become a blur. In a panic, he had run aimlessly into the nearby forest, and now, without Lean by his side, he found himself completely lost. To Ark, it already felt too late to change anything. More than anything else, he could not stop thinking about how worthless he was. In a town overflowing with adventurers, even the weak ones seemed to have some kind of purpose. Yet Ark felt as though he alone had no place where he truly belonged. Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed through the forest. Ark flinched in shock as something jumped out from the grass. After a brief moment, he calmed down and let out a sigh of relief. Standing before him was only a slime. With a bitter expression, Ark muttered that it had been quite a slimy surprise. Then a thought crossed his mind. Since he was already there, why not finally test his skill for himself? He remembered hearing countless times that his instant death magic was considered a complete dud. Apparently, it could not even defeat the weakest slime. The truth was, Ark did not even understand how the skill actually worked. Trying to recall the incantation, he quietly muttered a single word. Death. At that moment, a black skull-shaped aura suddenly appeared before him. Ark stiffened nervously. So this was instant death magic. Honestly, it looked even more terrifying than he had imagined. Staring at the floating black skull, he wondered why it had taken such a sinister form. His eyes widened with surprise as the skull slowly drifted toward the slime. Anxiously, he wondered what would happen next. Even if he was only level 1, if the spell worked at all, then there was still hope for him. However, just as the skull approached the slime, it slowly faded away into nothingness. Ark gasped in disbelief. It had missed. Desperate, he shouted for it to try again. Another black skull appeared and flew toward the slime, but once again, it disappeared before doing anything. Ark stared blankly at the scene. In the end, nothing had happened at all. Suddenly, a sharp wave of exhaustion hit him. Ark gasped painfully as strength drained from his body. He wondered if this was what happened when magical power was consumed for the first time. After paying such a heavy price in energy, all he had achieved was complete failure. He could not even defeat a single slime. A bitter smirk formed on his face. As memories from earlier resurfaced in his mind, a hollow laugh escaped his lips, filled with despair. Slowly, Ark collapsed onto his knees. Lean's voice echoed clearly in his thoughts. "It's a promise, Ark. Someday, let me join your party too, okay?" Ark clenched his teeth tightly. One after another, memories of Lean flashed before his eyes. He saw a younger Lean with innocent, sparkling eyes happily calling out his name. Then another memory appeared, showing her slightly older but still smiling warmly as she called to him once again. More memories followed, each showing Lean growing little by little, yet always smiling brightly whenever she said his name. Finally, the last image appeared before him, Lean walking away beside Alan. Ark cried out in anguish as tears streamed uncontrollably down his face. Alone in the silent forest, his sorrowful cries echoed through the darkness of the night. The wind rustled softly through the trees, filling the forest with gentle whispers. Ark slowly calmed down as he sat silently among the shadows of the woods. Deep in thought, he told himself there was no point in staying there forever. Nothing awaited him ahead anymore. Perhaps returning to his hometown was the only choice left. Suddenly, the slime from earlier bounced in front of him. Ark blinked in surprise before recognizing it. He muttered that the slime was still hanging around after all this time. Thinking about it more carefully, he realized something almost amusing. The slime was considered the weakest of all monsters, while he himself was the weakest of adventurers. As sad as it sounded, they were almost like comrades. With a small sigh, Ark apologized to the slime for earlier. Then he pushed himself back onto his feet, deciding that it was finally time to head back. However, he suddenly froze mid-step. A massive shadow stretched across the ground before him. Slowly, Ark lifted his gaze upward, and his entire body stiffened in terror. Towering above him stood an enormous beast. His eyes widened as he recognized the monstrous bear before him. Even the slime beside him flinched in fear. The enormous creature flicked its tongue out before raising a huge paw to attack. Ark stared at the beast nervously while the slime quickly leapt away from danger. The bear released a deep growl and lunged forward without warning. Ark shouted a warning and barely managed to dodge the attack by throwing himself aside. Catching his breath, he muttered that the strike had been far too close. Then realization struck him. The monster before him was a killing bear, a creature dangerous enough that only C-rank adventurers were recommended to exterminate it. There was no reason a rookie like him should ever encounter such a monster near town. Panic filled his thoughts as he questioned why a creature like that had appeared so close to civilization. No matter how he looked at it, the situation was disastrous. If things continued like this, they would be killed. Ark turned to flee, shouting desperately as he ran for his life. But the bear attacked again. Its strike sent Ark flying through the air before he crashed violently against a tree with a sickening impact. He coughed painfully as blood splattered from his mouth. As pain spread through his body, bitter thoughts filled his mind. Was this really the end waiting for someone as worthless as him? A weak adventurer discarded like garbage, dying at level 1 without ever accomplishing anything. The beast slowly crawled toward him. Ark knew with certainty that the next attack would kill him. Abandoned by his childhood friend, mocked by other adventurers, forgotten as if he were nothing more than an insignificant insect. That was the pathetic ending awaiting him. Yet Ark clenched his teeth tightly. He refused to accept it. Through trembling breaths, he muttered that he was not going to die there. He had not even begun his journey yet. He had accomplished nothing so far. The bear let out a thunderous growl as it towered over him. At that moment, Ark thrust out his hand and desperately cast his spell. Dark shadows burst forth from his palm as black skulls emerged and howled toward the beast. The sinister magic slammed directly into the killing bear. The monster shrieked in agony. A deafening sound echoed throughout the forest before silence suddenly fell over everything. Slowly, Ark opened his eyes. His breath caught in shock as he saw the enormous bear lying motionless on the ground. Its mouth hung open while its lifeless eyes stared blankly ahead. Carefully, Ark approached the creature and confirmed that it was truly dead. In disbelief, he muttered that the beast was completely lifeless. Then realization struck him. His instant death magic had actually worked. Ark let out an exhausted sigh before collapsing onto the ground. Moments later, excitement overwhelmed him, and he shouted joyfully that he had actually survived. For the first time in a long while, relief spread across his face. However, before he could properly rest, a strange light suddenly began glowing nearby. A mysterious presence slowly formed within the center of the radiance. As the bright light engulfed the area, Ark stared at it in confusion and asked what was happening. Chapter 2 began with a mysterious window appearing in the air. Ark stared at it in shock as he realized that his skill level had increased. Excitedly, he shouted for the points to be allocated. However, he soon fell silent while observing the floating screen more carefully. Curious, he wondered what it was and found it surprisingly interesting. He questioned whether it could follow his gaze as he moved around. As Ark continued examining the window, he recalled hearing something about skill levels and wondered if it was connected to his abilities. The moment he tapped the floating screen, a faint chime echoed through the air. At the same time, the skull before him suddenly snapped, its jaws wide open. The screen shimmered and displayed his basic information. His name was listed as Ark, and his occupation was shown as Daredevil Magician. Several lines of stats appeared before him, making him wonder if they truly represented his own abilities. Although his personal level remained at 1, another detail immediately caught his attention. Instant death magic was already at level 20. As he slowly tried to understand the situation, Ark considered the possibility that the skill itself could grow independently. He had never heard of an ability like that before. Yet if it were true, it would explain everything. Wanting to know more, he grabbed the floating window and demanded more details. In response, the screen revealed a skill map. Ark was surprised to see skills displayed in such a way. When he tapped the skill button, additional information appeared. The screen explained that the spell's range was extremely short, making success rates low from a distance. It worked best at close range, and by consuming points, he could unlock extra effects and abilities. While reading, Ark focused on the mention of the effective radius. He recalled how mages and parties usually fought from the rear, far away from their targets. Because of that distance, there were very few successful cases or records involving instant death magic. Thinking back on the earlier battle, he realized that he had been standing almost directly beside the killing bear when he used the spell. He wondered if that close proximity was the reason the instant death effect had succeeded so miraculously. Ark then noticed that the wounds he had received from the bear no longer caused any pain. It seemed that leveling up had restored his body in the same way as a normal recovery effect. After thinking it through, he concluded that in his case, increasing his skill level was what truly mattered. With the right abilities, he believed he might still be able to fight effectively even while remaining at level 1. He then turned his attention to the 20 skill points available on the map. Unsure of what to choose, he considered simply assigning them to abilities that looked promising. Suddenly, new symbols appeared across the screen. Ark gasped in surprise when he noticed another icon emerging before him. Curious, he muttered that it looked like a coffin and tapped on it. A new explanation window appeared, stating that with instant death magic, he could defeat enemies and store their bodies inside a separate dimension. Ark was stunned by the discovery. He realized how useful such an ability could be. Even if he sold defeated monsters to the guild, handling the transportation and dismantling alone was always difficult. Since there was no downside to having the skill, he decided it was worth taking. Determined to test the new ability, Ark extended his hands and silently cast the spell in his mind. The Coffin of the Dead. The killing bear slowly began to disappear. As the massive beast completely vanished from sight, Ark stared in amazement and exclaimed that it was incredible. He turned his attention back to the floating screen and noticed that he only had a few points remaining. Curious, he asked about another symbol displayed on the map. A new screen appeared and explained that, through magic, he could convert part of a defeated target's stats into his own abilities. Ark was stunned and questioned whether it was truly possible. Although the cost of the skill was high at 5 points, its potential seemed extraordinary. Since he was someone who normally could not raise his own stats, the skill appeared to be his greatest hope. Ark was already convinced that the information shown by the system was truthful. Everything described so far had proven accurate, leaving him with no reason to doubt it. Without hesitation, he decided to acquire the ability. After spending all of his remaining skill points, he reviewed the results and felt satisfied with how he had distributed them. He also found it incredibly convenient to check his stats directly through the floating window instead of relying on appraisal magic. Soon after, the screen disappeared into thin air. Ark reflected on everything that had happened that day. Despite nearly dying, his heart felt strangely calm, almost as if the entire experience had been unreal. By sheer luck, he had awakened a new power and managed to survive the edge of death. More importantly, he had finally seen a glimmer of hope. Closing his eyes, Ark focused entirely on his new goal. Nothing else mattered to him anymore. It felt as though his entire mind had become consumed by this single ambition. Although he had no idea how far he could go, he was prepared to challenge fate itself. He resolved to think of himself as someone reborn, determined to seize this opportunity. With newfound determination, Ark declared that the weakest person of them all would someday become the strongest. Later that night, at the Adventurers Guild branch in Boltana, Emmy stood frozen in shock. Ark had brought the corpse of a massive monster and asked her to purchase it as material. Staring at the beast in disbelief, Emmy struggled to process what she was seeing. She recognized it immediately as a killing bear, a monster ranked C-class or higher. Unable to understand how Ark possessed such a creature, she questioned him in confusion. Ark casually explained that he had defeated it using instant death magic. Emmy gasped so hard that she could barely form words. Meanwhile, Ark calmly told her to relax. The commotion quickly attracted attention from the surrounding adventurers. Someone in the crowd recognized Ark as the weak adventurer from earlier that day. Others wondered why he suddenly possessed a killing bear, especially since he had supposedly been empty-handed moments ago. Some stared at the monster in amazement, seeing such a creature up close for the very first time. Ignoring the crowd, Ark simply repeated that he wanted the guild to buy the monster. Emmy, still overwhelmed with shock, hurriedly agreed. At that moment, the guild doors swung open. Ark and Emmy turned toward the entrance as three men affiliated with the guild's dismantling team entered the building. The dead killing bear immediately caught their attention. The man in the center reacted with excitement, saying he had heard rumors about high-quality materials arriving. One of the others examined the bear closely and praised its condition. He pointed out that the valuable ore within the bear's body was still perfectly intact, despite such materials usually being damaged during battle. The leader explained that killing bears were dangerous C-rank monsters that inhabited deadly forest territories. Battles against them rarely ended without severe injuries on both sides, making the monster's condition even more surprising. Finally, the man called out to Ark and asked if they could purchase the materials. Ark immediately agreed and practically begged them to take it. The leader then ordered his men to move the monster out. The workers quickly responded together before carrying the massive killing bear away. Emmy called out apologetically for making Ark wait. She placed a bag in front of him and explained that it contained 20 gold coins as payment for the monster materials he had sold. She also added that the amount included a bonus reward based on the guild's quality assessment standards, especially considering the excellent condition of the killing bear. As the transaction ended, someone nearby greeted Ark politely. Standing near the guild exit, Ark casually responded before leaving. Emmy forced a stiff smile while watching him walk away, still struggling to believe what had happened. Once outside the guild, Ark checked the reward and realized he had earned far more money than he expected. He reflected on how useful the coffin of the deceased ability had already become. With enough funds now secured for future plans, he headed to an inn and decided that he would begin taking action early the next morning. When morning arrived, Ark visited a shop in town. The shopkeeper noticed him arriving so early and commented on his diligence, wondering what had brought such a young adventurer there. Internally, the man was surprised to see someone so young carrying himself seriously. Ark explained that he wanted to prepare for casually exploring a dungeon as a magician. To prove he had money, he showed the man a gold coin. The shopkeeper's eyes widened in shock at the sight of the gold coin. Instantly changing his attitude, he greeted Ark enthusiastically and treated him like an esteemed adventurer. The man cheerfully remarked that Ark was full of energy for heading toward a dungeon so early in the morning. The excited merchant then began recommending all sorts of supplies. He explained that Ark would first need a lantern and several pouches to organize food and water. He also suggested upgrading Ark's armor, pointing out that his current outfit would not be suitable for dungeon exploration. Overwhelmed by the endless stream of recommendations, Ark tiredly agreed and told the man to handle everything. After gathering the equipment, the shopkeeper proudly admired Ark's new appearance and declared that everything looked fantastic on him. He continued introducing more items, including potions, portable snacks, and hanging lanterns. For carrying water, he strongly recommended a leather flask, claiming it was both stylish and practical. The man explained that he had carefully prepared enough supplies to last 1 or 2 days inside the dungeon. He then introduced a waist pouch designed for convenience, emphasizing how useful it would be since it allowed Ark to keep his hands free. Ark agreed that the setup sounded perfect and decided to buy everything. He also asked the merchant to attach a map somewhere among the equipment, if possible. After thanking the shopkeeper sincerely, Ark finally set off toward his destination. While walking, he checked the map and confirmed that the nearest dungeon was located within the eastern forest. When Ark asked the town sentry about the dungeon's location, the guard explained that it was about an hour away on foot. Hearing this, Ark strengthened his resolve and reminded himself that his top priority was becoming stronger. For him, the key was increasing his stats through the absorption ability linked to his instant death magic. Ark believed that the most efficient place to hunt monsters was inside a dungeon, where dangerous creatures roamed freely. Most adventurers would never enter a dungeon alone, but for Ark, going by himself was the only way to push deeper into the unknown and grow stronger. Trying to encourage himself, Ark declared that he would simply give it a try and move forward as himself. As he entered the forest, he let out a sigh and noticed that the path was surprisingly easy to travel because of the busy road used by adventurers and travelers. Along the way, he spotted several guides and landmarks placed throughout the forest to help people navigate. Following the signs, Ark continued deeper into the woods. After walking for some time, he became thirsty and took a drink from his leather water bottle. Wiping his mouth afterward, he quietly muttered that he had finally arrived at the Dungeon of the East. Standing before the entrance of the cave, Ark reflected on how dungeons were considered the workplace of adventurers. According to the records he had read, dungeons were divided into multiple sections known as layers. Each layer possessed its own unique structure and environment, making every floor feel mysterious and different from the last. Naturally, the difficulty increased the deeper adventurers descended. However, the rewards hidden within the lower layers were valuable enough that countless adventurers willingly risked their lives to explore them. For Ark, though, the true reward was not treasure. The dungeon itself was filled with danger, and battling monsters was his real objective. With nervous determination in his eyes, Ark slowly stepped into the cave. He decided to remain in the upper layers for now, believing they would be enough to test the upgraded powers of his instant death magic. Carefully moving deeper into the dungeon, Ark suddenly heard a strange sound. His ears twitched as he quickly turned toward the source of the noise. A pair of feet slowly emerged from the darkness, followed by several goblins revealing themselves. Feeling nervous but focused, Ark recognized them immediately. He recalled that goblins were small monsters with little individual strength. However, they were intelligent enough to wield weapons and fight in groups, making them dangerous opponents capable of overwhelming lone adventurers. Although goblins were considered low-ranked E-class monsters, Ark realized that someone weak like him would normally be the perfect target for them. The goblins laughed loudly as their fierce eyes locked onto him in the silent dungeon. Suddenly, one of them leapt into the air and charged directly at Ark. Despite the attack, Ark remained calm, staring confidently at the approaching enemy. Chapter 3 began inside the dungeon. The goblins cheered loudly as one of them bravely charged toward Ark. In his mind, Ark welcomed the attack. He believed that in the world of instant death magic, distance was everything. He recalled that the effective range he had strengthened yesterday was now at 1, with a success rate of 2. He focused on pulling the enemies in as close as possible. As the goblin leapt into the air, Ark calmly prepared himself. The moment had come. He stretched out his hand toward the goblin and cast his death spell. A black skull shot forward and struck the creature. The goblin screamed in agony before collapsing lifelessly onto the ground. Ark celebrated inwardly, pleased that his plan had worked perfectly. The remaining goblins quickly gathered together and began surrounding him. Ark was startled at first, but soon realized they were simply being cautious. To him, that only created a better opportunity to attack. He extended his hand once again and cast a spell. Another black skull surged toward a goblin, killing it instantly. The goblin beside it cried out in shock. One goblin rushed in and attacked Ark, but he swiftly dodged the strike. Grabbing the creature by the head, he quietly cast his spell once more. "Death," he muttered. Ark noticed that no matter how many times he used his 3-hit combo, the exhaustion he expected never came. He also realized that his body had become much quicker and more agile. It was likely because, just as the system window had explained, defeating enemies with instant death magic increased his own stats. With growing confidence, Ark completely wiped out the goblin group. He remarked in surprise that goblins truly could not level up. Excitedly, he called out for his stats window. The floating screen appeared before him, displaying his current abilities. Ark realized that while the improvements to range and success rate made his magic easier to use, the real question was how much his stats increased after every victory. As he clenched his fist, he could feel his body becoming lighter and faster with each defeated enemy. The effects of soul retrieval seemed incredibly powerful. Logically, he believed that if this continued, he might eventually be able to use magic endlessly. Suddenly, Ark noticed the equipment scattered on the ground. He wondered if the system allowed him to store monster equipment as well. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed a dark passage nearby. He quietly muttered to himself that it looked like a side tunnel. Slowly, he stepped into the darkness. The deeper he went, the less the light reached the walls around him, making the narrow tunnel feel unsettling. As he looked around, Ark sensed that something felt wrong. Without warning, a beast emerged from the darkness. Ark froze in surprise. Soon, more creatures appeared with eager growls. The monsters were orcs, savage beasts that resembled large cats with physiques superior to humans. They favored heavy weapons such as giant clubs and axes in battle. Ark quickly realized that the rank of the monsters appearing before him was steadily increasing. The orcs growled fiercely and charged at Ark together, swinging their heavy weapons as they rushed toward him. Slightly nervous, Ark realized they were surprisingly fast for creatures of their size. One of the orcs raised its weapon high and brought it down in a powerful strike. Ark quickly dodged the attack and immediately cast his spell. A black skull surrounded the orc, causing it to collapse onto its knees while screaming in agony. Ark noticed that, unlike goblins, the orcs attacked without hesitation. Another orc rushed toward him with its weapon ready to strike. As Ark watched carefully, he realized he could clearly see their attacks coming. With that realization, he swiftly dodged once more and faced the next incoming enemy. He quickly ran toward the charging orc, activated his spell, and cast it at close range. Moments later, the orc dropped lifelessly to the ground. One of the remaining orcs began sweating nervously. Ark let out a quiet sigh and realized that he would never have been able to dodge attacks like that before. Even the very first stat absorption had greatly increased his speed. Although he originally planned to focus on improving the effective range of his magic, he now understood that he could create close combat situations perfectly suited for his instant death spell. Calmly standing in the middle of the surrounding orcs, Ark watched as they attacked together. Their eyes widened in shock when he suddenly disappeared from their sight. Appearing behind them, Ark admitted that he himself was amazed by their speed as well. The orcs flinched in surprise. Stepping forward confidently, Ark announced that only 3 enemies remained. Fear appeared in the orc's eyes. Ark apologized lightly before casting his spell once again toward one of the trembling monsters. After finishing the battle, Ark casually took a bite of his snacks while thinking about the results. Even after defeating 5 more orcs, his level still had not increased. It seemed that higher-ranked monsters did not provide as much experience compared to hunting bears. As he rested, Ark remembered hearing that orc meat was considered delicious. Since he had stored the corpses, he figured he could probably earn a good amount of money by selling them later. Suddenly, Ark stopped moving when he noticed a staircase appearing deep within the rocky dungeon. Below it, he could see a faint glimmer of light. Curious, he walked down the stairs and squinted as bright light filled his vision. Continuing deeper inside, he stared around in amazement. Above him, strange glowing stones embedded in the ceiling illuminated the entire area. Before him stretched a breathtaking sight, a massive underground forest with a flowing river running through it. Ark could hardly believe his eyes. He wondered if this marked a change between dungeon layers, because it no longer felt like a dungeon at all. With the area so brightly lit, he realized he no longer needed a lantern. Suddenly, a voice called out to him. Ark paused in surprise, realizing it sounded like people nearby. A man loudly shouted for him to come over. Ark waved back, wondering if they were other adventurers. Confused by the sudden commotion, he watched as 3 adventurers hurriedly ran toward him. A man grabbed Ark by the shoulders and asked if he was okay. Confused by their reaction, Ark asked if something was wrong. Another man stepped forward in disbelief and pointed out that there was a child wandering alone in a dangerous place like that. The bearded man shouted that Ark was the one out of his mind, saying it was natural for them to worry about him. The bearded man stared closely at Ark and asked how he had even managed to make it that far by himself. He then asked if Ark was injured. Ark casually explained that he had fought a few monsters, but it was nothing serious, so there was no need to worry. The men were shocked by his answer. One of them asked if Ark had gone into battle alone because he wanted to die. Ark immediately denied it, saying he had no intention of doing anything like that. The man could not believe someone would recklessly explore a dungeon alone. As the man continued gripping Ark's shoulder, a woman gently slapped his hand away. She calmly said that since Ark was fine, they should leave it at that. She then explained that they were already heading back to the surface and invited Ark to join them. Another man laughed and mentioned that they had collected plenty of orc meat during their expedition. He urged everyone to hurry back so they could sell it for cash. Another agreed, saying it was lucky they had met Ark in a safe zone and that they should escort him back to town together. Curious, Ark asked what a safe zone was. One of the men explained that dungeons were mysterious places filled with strange phenomena. For unknown reasons, there were special areas where monsters could not enter. Adventurers often rested there before continuing their journey or returning to the surface. Hearing this, Ark silently thought that the dungeon truly had many hidden mechanisms that could be used to one's advantage. The man then declared that they should get moving soon. However, Ark quickly stopped them and said he intended to stay where he was. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the area. The group turned toward the sound in alarm. Moments later, several wounded men stumbled out of the forest. One of them desperately begged for help. The man immediately tried to calm him down, reminding him that they were inside a safe zone. He then called out to Azuri and told her to heal the injured man. Azuri quickly cast her healing magic, and the wounded man's injuries began to recover almost instantly. After checking his condition, Azuri asked how he felt. The man answered that he was much better thanks to her healing. He then asked what exactly had happened. The injured man looked at them nervously and asked if they had ever fought skeletons before. Ark was slightly surprised by the question. One of the adventurers muttered that skeletons were the bony bros of the underworld. Another explained that undead monsters were troublesome, but D-rank skeletons normally should not pose much of a threat. The wounded man quickly agreed, saying they had thought the same thing. However, he explained that the skeleton they encountered earlier was completely different. The group listened carefully as he began telling them what had happened. Chapter 4 began deep inside the dungeon as a terrified voice shouted about a giant skeleton. One of the wounded adventurers explained that he had only encountered such a creature once before. Normally, giant monsters with human-like bodies were known in other countries as ogres or giants. They could grow nearly 4 meters tall and reach B-rank strength, making them extremely dangerous opponents. Another adventurer could hardly believe it. A man wearing a hat questioned why a monster the size of an ogre would appear on the upper floors of the dungeon. He shouted that they were only D-rank adventurers and stood no chance against such a creature, even as a full party. One of the wounded men tried to calm everyone down. He explained that his companions were hiding near the back wall and that he had escaped through a narrow passage between the trees. Since the monster was so massive, there was no way it could fit through that path. He admitted that he had panicked earlier, but now believed the area was already a safe zone. Hoping for help, he asked if they could take him outside once he had rested a little longer. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the dungeon. Art turned toward the sound and asked if everyone else had heard it too. One of the men nervously told him not to scare them like that, but the noise came again, even louder than before. Panic quickly spread among the adventurers as they realized the sound was drawing closer. One man muttered in confusion, wondering where exactly it was coming from. Without warning, a massive skeleton climbed up from beyond the cliff. Ark and the man beside him froze in shock as the giant monster appeared before them, gripping a huge weapon in its hands. One of the adventurers screamed in terror while Ark carefully observed the creature. Despite its enormous size, the monster moved with incredible agility as it climbed onto the cliff and chased after the fleeing adventurers. Ark was amazed. Even in that massive state, the creature could leap with unbelievable mobility. The wounded adventurers shouted in disbelief, unable to accept what they were seeing. The giant skeleton had effortlessly climbed the cliff and continued its pursuit. The monster then stood silently for a moment before releasing a deafening roar. At that instant, every adventurer instinctively understood the overwhelming difference between themselves and the creature. The gap in power was absolute. It felt like they had encountered death itself. One of the men stood frozen in fear, wondering what someone like him could possibly do against such a monster. Gathering his resolve, he ordered his comrades to push the creature back and escort the others to the exit. He then turned toward Ark, intending to tell him to escape as well. But his words stopped halfway. Ark had already begun charging straight toward the monster. The man shouted in disbelief as Ark rushed directly at the skeleton ogre. While sprinting forward, Ark realized he could actually keep up with the creature's movements. There was not much difference between their speeds at all. Still, one concern remained in his mind. Ark immediately cast his instant death spell on the skeleton ogre. The giant monster stared at the approaching skulls in surprise before suddenly screaming in agony. Ark silently wondered whether instant death magic would even work against the undead. Watching the battle unfold, Doug cursed under his breath in shock. He could not believe what he was seeing. Ark was dodging every single fierce attack from the monstrous skeleton with incredible skill. The other adventurer silently realized that he could now understand why Ark claimed he had conquered the dungeon alone. Even so, the man believed Ark was only managing a defensive battle. Although Ark continued using some kind of magic, it did not appear to be very effective against the skeleton ogre. The man called out to Doug, saying he would handle the burden himself. Doug immediately told him to run away while he still could. Meanwhile, as Ark continued fighting the skeleton ogre, he calmly analyzed the situation in his mind. Avoiding the monster's attacks was manageable, but he began wondering if the creature possessed some kind of resistance against instant death magic. He had already lost count of how many spells he had cast. Unfortunately, instant death magic was the only skill he possessed. Ark rushed toward the monster once again. He thought that if he could just move one more step closer, right to the edge of its attack range, he could land another spell. Stretching out his hand, Ark attempted to cast instant death once more. But nothing happened. His magic power had completely run out. At that moment, the skeleton ogre lifted its enormous weapon high into the air, preparing a devastating attack. Ark muttered in frustration, realizing he was in serious danger. Suddenly, the monster's arm exploded apart. Chunks of flesh from the baggage strapped to the monster fell to the ground as Ark stared in shock. A loud voice then shouted at the giant creature, calling for its attention. The skeleton ogre turned toward the voice and immediately chased after the man who had run into the forest. Once inside the dense woods, the giant monster became trapped among the tall trees. Its massive size limited both its movement and attack range. Watching from nearby, Ark realized that the man had instantly taken away the monster's greatest advantages, its agility and reach. He understood that adventurers did not rely only on skills and equipment. They also used the terrain to survive. The skeleton ogre roared furiously and began smashing trees in an attempt to find its target. The man nervously hid behind one of the trees, knowing all he could do was buy time. Even though he had reluctantly taken on the role of bait, he hoped that by distracting the monster, the others would be able to escape safely back to the surface. Then a voice suddenly spoke behind him. Ark quietly asked if he was all right. Startled, the man nearly jumped in shock before Ark gestured for him to stay quiet. After calming down, the man asked why Ark had not simply escaped earlier. With his speed, it should have been possible. Ark calmly replied that he intended to defeat the monster. The man stared at him in disbelief and asked if he seriously thought he had a chance of winning. The magic he had just witnessed seemed completely ineffective. Slightly embarrassed, Ark admitted that his instant death magic was difficult to use properly. The moment the man heard the words instant death magic, he froze in disbelief. Grabbing Ark by the shoulders, he shouted in shock, asking if he truly possessed instant death magic. He called it a disappointing and useless skill, wondering how anyone could possibly fight with something like that. The sudden noise caused the skeleton ogre to stop moving. Ark quickly covered the man's mouth as both of them hid tensely behind the tree, praying the monster would not notice them. After a few moments, the giant creature slowly passed by their hiding place. Once it was safe, Ark whispered that he had actually defeated every monster he encountered so far using instant death magic. However, he honestly did not know whether the spell worked against undead creatures. The man covered his face in disbelief. He muttered that undead monsters were already supposed to be dead in the first place. Whether instant death could even affect them was impossible to know. Yet despite such uncertainty and vague knowledge, the man could not understand one thing. Why had Ark still chosen to stand and fight against such a terrifying monster? Ark calmly replied that even if he could not defeat the monster, he still intended to stay and fight. He then asked the man if the same situation was not happening with the others as well. The man admitted that if everyone had tried to escape together earlier, there would definitely have been casualties. Ark explained that he was the only person there who did not truly belong to the party. Because of that, he thought that if the worst happened to him, it would not really matter to anyone else. The man fell silent after hearing those words. After a moment, he quietly told Ark that he did not believe that was true at all. Ark continued speaking. Just as the man himself had been shocked earlier, most people believe the power Ark was born with was nothing more than a useless skill. Because of that belief, he never really had the opportunity to properly fight alongside his party members. In the end, he had no choice but to survive as an adventurer while relying only on his instant death magic. Ark then said that if he died there because of that skill, it would simply prove that both he and his ability were truly worthless disappointments. Hearing those words, the man could not help but wonder about the source of Ark's determination. After thinking for a moment, the man told Ark that if the two of them worked together, they might be able to come up with a plan to defeat the monster. The two quietly discussed their strategy while hiding within the forest. The man eventually asked Ark if he was really willing to go through with such a dangerous plan. Ark replied that at this point, it would feel shameful if he alone tried to run away. Besides, increasing their chances of victory, even slightly, was better than doing nothing. The man smiled after hearing that. He introduced himself as Gaston and asked for Ark's name. Ark answered simply, telling him that his name was Ark. Gaston laughed loudly and said that it was an amazing name. The sudden shout caused the skeleton ogre to stop moving. Standing side by side, Gaston and Ark bravely prepared themselves as they waited for the perfect moment to strike. Chapter 5 began 3 years earlier when a man suddenly announced that Gaston was fired. Shocked, Gaston asked what he meant. The man explained that it was not an order from the higher-ups, but because the level cap for military service candidates had been raised. Gaston's level cap was only 30. While it was not considered terrible, it was no longer enough given the current situation. The man then asked everyone, including the other candidates, to step back. He told Gaston that they had all worked hard until now. Frustrated, Gaston protested at the sudden change. He argued that even if his level was lower, his years of experience still held great value. Calling out desperately to the captain, Gaston tried to defend himself. The captain calmly replied that in their country, there were no proper evaluation standards beyond level caps and skills. He reassured Gaston that the younger adventurers he had trained possessed far greater potential and would easily make up for the lack of his experience. Hearing those words, Gaston fell silent, unable to argue back. One of the men then asked him if it was true that he was leaving. Gaston apologized to them. He admitted that there was no hiding his lack of power anymore, and from now on, the rest would be left to them. As the others begged him to stay, Gaston bitterly turned away and ran from his comrades. Under the clear sky, an old memory resurfaced in his mind. Gaston sprinted swiftly through the area while a skeleton orc chased after him with a wide grin. The monster let out a deafening roar as it pursued its target. Gaston shouted back at the creature, provoking it to come after him. At the same time, he wondered how Ark could possibly defeat such a monster. He then remembered the conversation they had earlier. Ark explained that the monster had an extremely long reach, making it difficult to enter its effective range. He also noticed that its resistance to magic was different from that of ordinary monsters. Because of that, Ark wanted to use instant death magic from a distance where the chances of success were higher. Confused, Gaston asked if instant death magic depended on distance. Ark replied that, as far as he knew, it worked that way. After thinking for a moment, Gaston proposed a plan. He told Ark that he would act as the decoy and take the monster's attack head-on. By doing so, he would create a single opening for Ark to strike. Ark hesitated and warned him that taking even one hit from the monster could kill him. However, Gaston confidently replied that despite his appearance, he used to serve in the military. He believed that even against a stronger opponent, they could survive as long as they focused on defense rather than trying to win outright. Then another memory flashed through Gaston's mind, an image of himself standing helplessly in the rain after a defeat. Because of that memory, Gaston declared to himself that he did not become an adventurer only to run away once again. As the monster drew closer, Gaston stood his ground and waited calmly. He planned to lure the creature into the narrow forest passage, knowing that the obstacles in the area would prevent it from using its wide, sweeping attacks and massive hammers effectively. The monster's attack options were limited to sword strikes. As the skeleton ogre raised its sword high above its head, Gaston carefully observed its movements. He wondered if it was preparing for a powerful vertical slash. Remembering Ark's advice about targeting weak points, Gaston positioned himself carefully, thinking that placing the large tree behind him would restrict the monster's movements. However, the monster suddenly charged forward at incredible speed. Gaston immediately realized that instead of slashing downward, the creature had chosen to thrust its sword straight at him. Despite knowing he was weaker and slower than the monster, Gaston believed he could still manage if the attacks came directly toward him. He quickly formed a plan in his mind. The moment the monster attacked, he would advance forward instead of retreating. He knew that if he hesitated even for an instant, he would die. As Gaston rushed toward the monster, he calmly analyzed the overwhelming difference in their abilities. There was no way he could withstand a full-powered attack head-on. Instead, he intended to disrupt the monster's timing by stepping forward at the critical moment and reducing the force of the blow. But the plan failed. The monster's sword slammed directly into Gaston's shield at an angle. A violent impact shook his entire body, and he gasped loudly from the force. His shield shattered in half instantly. Without giving him time to recover, the monster immediately pursued him with another attack. At that same moment, Ark rushed forward from behind the monster. Gaston shouted toward him as Ark charged ahead with determination in his eyes. Gaston intentionally threw himself off balance, completely losing his footing in order to create an opening. Seeing the chance, Ark believed he was finally close enough. Confidently, he prepared a spell and cast instant death magic. But suddenly, an unseen force stopped Ark in midair. Shocked, Ark muttered in confusion, wondering what had happened. In the next instant, the monster struck him with a powerful punch, sending him flying through the air. Gaston stared in horror. He realized the monster had hidden another arm as a secret weapon. It seemed the creature had somehow taken and assimilated the arm from another ogre's corpse. Ark cried out in pain after crashing into the ground. Worried, Gaston called out to him, but before he could react further, the skeleton ogre suddenly appeared in front of him. In one swift motion, the monster tore apart the armor Gaston was wearing. Ark's eyes widened in shock. Slowly regaining consciousness, Ark forced himself to stand. He realized he had only blacked out for a moment. Panicked, he immediately searched for Gaston. As the monster walked past him, Ark flinched in fear. Then Gaston finally came into view. Seeing his condition, Ark shouted internally in alarm. He realized the situation had become disastrous. Even while enduring intense pain, Ark forced his body to move. However, he quickly understood that although he was not completely immobilized, he could no longer dodge attacks or close the distance quickly enough. To make matters worse, the monster's hidden arm had made both its offense and defense even more dangerous. Grinding his teeth in desperation, Ark desperately searched for any possible solution. He forced himself to think of something, anything at all, but no answer came to mind. Then suddenly, the memory of those cold, glaring eyes resurfaced within his thoughts. A cruel voice echoed in his mind, calling him useless once again. Meanwhile, Gaston stared at the monster as it slowly approached him. His body trembled with fear, and he cursed quietly under his breath. Deep down, he already knew this battle might end in defeat. In his thoughts, Gaston told himself that if Ark was somehow still alive, then he should run away this time. He believed escaping would be the right decision. As despair filled his mind, images of his party members appeared before him. He silently apologized to Doug and Azuri, thinking about the good times they had shared together during their adventures. Then Gaston slowly lifted his gaze upward. To his shock, Ark suddenly appeared high above the monster, leaping through the air. Gaston stared in disbelief, unable to understand what Ark was doing. At the same time, Ark steeled himself and thought that this would be their final chance. He planned to use gravity to his advantage by attacking from above in one swift motion. All he needed to do was grab onto the monster's body and cast his instant death spell directly. Suddenly, the skeleton ogre turned around and let out a thunderous roar. Gaston's eyes widened in horror as the monster immediately attacked Ark while he was still suspended in midair. However, at the last second, Ark narrowly avoided the deadly strike by using the corpse of a fallen orc as cover. Gaston could only stare in shock. Ark then activated his skill, Dead Coffin, the casket of the departed. With confidence, he declared that it was time to finish the fight. Leaping directly above the monster, Ark unleashed his instant death magic. In his mind, he shouted fiercely as he released the spell toward the skeleton ogre. Meanwhile, deeper within the dungeon, the other adventurers froze after hearing the monster's deafening roar once again. Doug immediately recognized the sound and worried about what was happening to Gaston and Ark. At that moment, one of the frightened adventurers suggested giving up. Trembling in fear, the man claimed it was only a matter of time before the monster killed them all and insisted they should retreat before it reached them. Hearing those words, Doug angrily grabbed the man by the collar and shouted at him not to insult Gaston. He firmly believed Gaston would protect everyone. Before the argument could continue, another voice shouted for everyone to stay calm. Frustrated and helpless, Doug rushed outside, cursing the situation. He bitterly muttered that there was nothing he could do. Suddenly, the trees around them shook violently. Doug froze in place. The skeleton ogre suddenly emerged from the forest and released another terrifying roar. Doug and Azuri stiffened in fear as the monster appeared before them. But then, unexpectedly, the creature stopped moving. Its eyes lost all life, becoming dull and empty. Moments later, the massive monster dropped to its knees before collapsing heavily onto the ground. As the dust and smoke slowly cleared, Doug flinched in surprise. Two figures gradually emerged from the haze. It was Ark and Gaston. Doug stood frozen for a moment in disbelief before finally letting out a deep sigh of relief. Without wasting another second, he and Azuri rushed toward the two survivors. Overwhelmed with happiness and relief, Doug jumped excitedly as he realized they had made it back alive. Chapter 6 began with a man glaring coldly at Ark. Calling him Oni-chan, the man said he could no longer stay quiet. He stood intimidatingly in front of Ark, while Ark remained kneeling in a seiza position, wondering to himself why he was even sitting like that. The man questioned Ark, asking if he was really an adventurer and what his rank was. Hesitantly, Ark answered that he was rank E. Hearing that, the man reacted in disbelief, pointing out that E rank was the starting rank for complete beginners. He angrily demanded to know if Ark was seriously claiming that he had gathered all those materials by himself. Ark nervously replied that it would be difficult to prove it, but it was the truth. In his mind, he reflected on how the materials had originally been divided among Gaston and the others. Even after splitting them up, each person still ended up with a considerable amount. After parting ways with Gaston's party, Ark decided to organize his share once he returned to town. As Ark tried to explain himself, another voice interrupted, assuming that he must have simply been a baggage carrier for some adventuring party. The man responded that such an explanation would at least make sense. However, Ark calmly stated that he did not belong to any party. The man called out to him again, asking if Ark even realized he was cornering himself with such claims. Frustrated, the man scratched his head and admitted he could not tell whether Ark was lying or simply foolishly honest. The man then explained that if the materials were truly legitimate, Ark should have sold them at the main guild on the main street. He questioned why Ark had instead come all the way to a suspicious shop hidden in the back alley. According to him, that alone proved the situation was abnormal. Confused, Ark innocently asked if that meant the shop itself was abnormal. The man immediately snapped back, angrily saying that was not what he meant. Ark then began explaining the real reason. He said that he had originally intended to go to the guild, but trouble arose because he stood out after bringing in high-rarity materials before. Suspicious adventurers approached him and, without any proof, accused him of stealing the materials. They demanded that he hand everything over. The situation escalated when one of the men threatened Ark and attacked him. Forced to defend himself, Ark fought back, which caused a major commotion inside the guild. Ark pointed out that fighting within the guild was considered a violation, meaning he probably would not be able to show his face there for several days. The man then asked what kind of adventurers they were. Ark, slightly confused by the question at first, eventually described them as a level 20 party led by a man with long, tied-back hair. However, Ark added that the leader had been the first one to run away during the incident. Hearing that description, the man muttered under his breath that the guy was causing trouble again. Curious, Ark asked if he knew him, and the man simply answered that he did. The man admitted that the situation explained why Ark had chosen to sell the materials outside the guild. He explained that, depending on the quality of the materials and the adventurer's abilities, defeating orcs might still be believable. However, when it came to the monster Ark described, the man firmly declared that there was no way an E-rank adventurer could have defeated it alone. Ark looked toward the man and calmly told him that if he promised not to get angry, he would explain everything. He then revealed that the monster in question was a skeleton ogre, which he had encountered in the eastern dungeon. During that time, he had met a party led by a man named Gaston. Hearing the name, the man reacted in surprise and asked if he meant Gaston, the former soldier. Ark silently stared at him, causing the man to quickly apologize and tell him to continue. Ark explained that although he had originally been alone, he eventually teamed up with Gaston's party to defeat the monster using instant death magic. After finishing his explanation, Ark asked if the man believed him. The man tilted his head skeptically and questioned the use of instant death magic. He admitted that if such magic connected successfully, it would indeed kill in a single hit regardless of level or rank differences. However, he also pointed out that landing such a spell so perfectly was nearly impossible, making the whole story sound ridiculous. Ark silently thought to himself that it really did seem impossible. However, the man eventually sighed and admitted that if Gaston had truly helped Ark, then perhaps the story was not entirely unbelievable. Hearing that, Ark felt relieved and realized once again how much trust Gaston had earned from others. He never expected Gaston's reputation would end up helping him even after they had parted ways. Breaking the silence, the man finally gave Ark a thumbs up and declared that he understood the situation now. He agreed to buy all the materials at once and promised he would not complain anymore. Ark was slightly surprised by the sudden change in attitude. The man explained that it was still business for him, so he would lower the price slightly as a form of insurance in case there was hidden trouble involved. He then asked if Ark was fine with that arrangement. Ark immediately agreed without any objections. Satisfied, the man enthusiastically told him to wait for a moment. While dismantling the monsters, Ark noticed a black coat nearby and asked about it. The man picked it up and asked if Ark liked it. After checking it briefly, the man decided to include the coat as a bonus together with the insurance adjustment. Surprised, Ark caught the coat in his hands and asked if it was really okay for him to take it. The man casually told him not to worry because it was nothing special. Giving Ark a wink, he added that wearing something like that would at least make a newcomer look more respectable. Ark quietly realized the man was right. Until now, he had never paid attention to his appearance, and his clothes were already worn and ragged. He did not look like the kind of adventurer or mage that people would trust. Without hesitation, he quickly put on the black coat. The man nodded in satisfaction and remarked that the size fit well enough. He then explained that the town was overflowing with adventurers, ranging from complete beginners like Ark to highly experienced veterans. Because of that, even smaller shops like his could survive without problems. Curious, Ark asked if the man himself was also a drifter, mentioning that he had personally come from a rural village. The man replied that he was. He explained that the town was fairly large and was located near several dungeons. Because of this, it had become a popular base for adventurers, making the distribution of monster materials highly profitable. However, the man also warned that the large number of monsters surrounding the area made the entire country of Krisha a dangerous place overall. The man explained that the king seemed deeply concerned about the increasing number of monsters appearing throughout the country. According to him, the situation had become serious enough that the kingdom was even summoning S-rank adventurers from outside the nation. From what the man had seen, however, the selection process for those S-rank adventurers appeared rather random. As he spoke, the man briefly mentioned names like Alan and Balls before wondering aloud whether Ark was the type of person who acted for the sake of others. He questioned if Ark's motivations were simply for money or if there was some deeper reason behind his actions. The man then remarked that Ark had earned enough money to survive for a while, especially considering how valuable the monster materials had been. He tossed a heavy bag of coins toward Ark, who caught it with one hand. Smiling broadly, the man told Ark that from now on, he should come directly to their shop whenever he had materials to sell. Proudly introducing the place as the conscience of Boltana, the man asked Ark to continue supporting Gale's shop. Ark silently thought that matters involving national politics meant very little to him. After leaving the shop, he considered his next plans. Although he was supposed to meet Gaston later, it was still far too early in the evening. Quietly, Ark muttered the word status. Instantly, a floating window appeared before him in midair. Looking at it in surprise, Ark realized just how much power he had absorbed from the skeleton ogre. His abilities had increased roughly 4 or 5 times compared to before the battle. Even considering that it had been a rare monster, the increase felt abnormal. With this new status, Ark concluded that he should now be capable of exploring the dungeon alone without much difficulty. Deciding to prepare immediately, he returned to an item shop and purchased the supplies he needed before heading back toward the dungeon. By the time he left town, the sun had already set. Ark thought that nighttime would actually work in his favor since he could move around alone without attracting attention. As he traveled through the forest, a long vine suddenly shot toward him. Ark quickly dodged the attack. The creature was an E-rank carnivorous plant monster known for devouring small animals that fit inside its mouth. Soon after, another E-rank monster appeared, a forest wolf, a beast famous for attacking intruders within its territory while moving swiftly through dense bushes. Ark observed that monsters became far more active outside the dungeon at night. However, compared to bears and ogres, these creatures were much lower rank. Even so, he decided it was still worth defeating and absorbing them, even if the gains were small. Using magic, Ark instantly eliminated the monsters with ease. Moments later, another forest wolf suddenly appeared behind him. Ark sensed its presence immediately and dodged in one smooth motion. To his surprise, however, the wolf completely ignored him and ran past him instead. Confused, Ark watched the beast disappear into the distance. He wondered why it had not attacked him at all. It had almost seemed frightened of something else entirely. Realizing this, Ark quickly turned toward the direction the wolf had come from. A deep, echoing sound suddenly rang throughout the forest, causing him to tense up and prepare himself. Then, a young girl burst out from the trees, desperately running toward him. With tears in her eyes, she cried out for help as she rushed forward. Ark stared at her in surprise while warning her that it was dangerous. Before she could say anything else, the girl collapsed directly into his arms. Looking closer, Ark noticed her animal ears and tail, immediately recognizing her as a beast man. He wondered if all her injuries had come from fleeing through the forest. Worried, Ark asked what had happened. Through her tears, the girl desperately spoke about her village and begged him to help everyone there. Unfortunately, Ark could barely understand what she was trying to say. Then a chilling realization struck him. If the wolf earlier had not been fleeing from the girl herself, then something much more terrifying must have been chasing her. Ark immediately stood up and moved the girl behind him protectively. Staring cautiously into the dark forest, he activated a spell in his hand and prepared for whatever was about to appear. Although he had expected an immediate attack, nothing emerged at first. Still, Ark remained certain that something dangerous was nearby. The girl's terror alone was enough proof that he could not lower his guard. Suddenly, a massive wolf emerged from the darkness. The beast released a deep growl that echoed through the forest and reached Ark's ears. Without hesitation, Ark unleashed the spell he had prepared and shouted that the creature had finally appeared. In Chapter 7, Ark cast his spell toward the beast hiding in the bushes. His instant death spell flew straight toward the target, but nothing seemed to happen. Even so, Ark could sense something from within the darkness. He realized the enemy was being cautious. Suddenly, a loud cry echoed through the area, breaking the silence. Ark gasped in surprise as he realized there was more than one creature nearby. Including the growl he heard earlier, there were at least 3 enemies surrounding them. He quickly understood the danger of the situation. Ark knew he could not get close to the bushes while protecting the girl at the same time. Fighting several enemies at once was also extremely risky. Unsure of what to do, he desperately searched for a solution. Then, with determined eyes, he decided to use the special ability he had gained after defeating the skeleton ogre. Remembering that battle, Ark activated the skill without hesitation. Quadruple Death Burial. This ability, obtained from the four-armed skeleton ogre, greatly increased the range and mana consumption of his next instant death spell by 4 times. However, it required charging time before activation. Ark stretched out his hand as black smoke gathered around it. Though nervous, he believed this was his strongest attack and his best chance to survive. He clenched his teeth and tried to steady his trembling hand. At that moment, a wolf appeared from the bushes. "Go!" Ark shouted. A massive skull formed from his hand and shot forward at incredible speed. The wolf watched cautiously as the spell passed through the bushes. A painful scream suddenly echoed from within the forest. Ark realized the attack had worked. With his current stats, the heavy mana consumption no longer made him collapse from exhaustion. That meant he could still continue fighting if necessary. The bushes rustled violently, and Ark carefully waited for another enemy to appear. However, after some time, he realized the remaining monsters had fled. Relieved, he turned toward the injured girl. "It'll be all right now," he told her gently. Ark handed her a potion and instructed her to drink slowly. The girl quickly finished the bottle, and after letting out a relieved sigh, she suddenly lost consciousness. "Whoa there!" Ark shouted in surprise as he caught her. The girl peacefully fell asleep in his arms. Ark guessed that she had simply exhausted all her strength after everything that had happened. Considering how terrified she must have been, it was understandable. Ark decided that this was no longer the time to continue leveling up. His priority now was to safely return the girl to Botlana. Still, he remembered the monster he had defeated earlier. Quietly, he cast another spell in his mind. Dead coffin. Ark looked toward the forest where the beast had been struck. He believed the spell should have landed, but he could not afford to chase the enemy deeper into the woods while carrying the girl. Her safety came first. As he carried her on his back and prepared to leave, Ark thought that he had experienced something similar before. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Alan's party was battling monsters. "Take this," someone shouted. Alan smiled after the attack landed successfully. "Right, good work, Lin-san," he said. Alan's party easily defeated the monsters surrounding them. After the fight, Alan turned toward Lin and asked about her current level. Lin replied that her level did not seem to increase from the recent battle. Hearing this, Alan wondered if monsters of that rank were no longer enough for her growth. Lin apologized quietly, but Alan immediately told her there was no need to apologize. He reminded her that she had already reached level 20 in only 2 days, which proved how quickly she was improving. Alan then suggested that next time they should head even deeper into the dungeon. Fion asked if they were finished for the day, mentioning that holding back during battle was exhausting. Dorothea, the party's magician, agreed with her complaint, while the paladin, Eris, silently stood nearby, without saying a word. Lin stepped forward shyly and thanked everyone for helping her. She promised that she would continue working even harder from now on. Alan smiled warmly at her, explained that everyone in the party were allies who supported one another without hesitation. He told her that she did not need to feel inferior to the rest of them. Touched by his words, Lin stared at him in admiration and softly muttered his name. "Well then, shall we withdraw?" Alan announced. The party agreed and returned for the night. Later that evening, a loud knock suddenly interrupted Alan's rest. When he opened the door, he found Eris standing outside. "Hi, Eris. Did you need something?" Alan asked casually. Eris entered the room and sat down on his bed before showing him a rolled-up document. She explained that it was another message from the king, pressuring them for updates regarding the search for the keys. Alan let out a troubled smile and muttered that they were already doing everything they could. He complained about how impatient the king was being. Contrary to the rumors spreading throughout town, the reason S-rank adventurers like Alan had gathered in Krisha was not simply to hunt monsters. Their true objective was a special request from the king who ruled the territory. They had been ordered to search the deepest parts of the dungeon where mysterious keys were said to exist. Alan himself did not know the true purpose or power of the keys. However, what caught his attention was the strange reward being offered in exchange for them, a noble title and land. Even for an S-rank adventurer, gaining influence equal to the nobility was nearly impossible. That was why the king's offer felt suspicious to Alan. For the king himself to promise such an extraordinary reward meant the keys must hold tremendous value. As Alan quietly thought to himself, he wondered whether he could simply take the keys for himself and abandon the request entirely if he ever found them. He questioned whether the keys were truly valuable enough to silence even the nobility. Alan remained silent as he continued thinking deeply about the matter. Eris eventually broke the silence and asked how long he intended to keep coddling Lin. Alan realized that was the true reason she had come to speak with him. He calmly replied that there was no need to rush things. Only a few adventurer parties besides theirs were capable of reaching the lower levels of the dungeon anyway. Because of that, he believed there was no reason to hurry. Alan assured Eris that Lin's talent was genuine. Until now, Alan's party had never needed a healer with recovery magic. In fact, their overwhelming combat strength had always made such support unnecessary. However, the dungeon where the keys were hidden was different from anything they had faced before. A massive monster plague infested the area. The deeper they advanced into the dungeon, the more monsters continuously appeared. It was unlike any dungeon Alan and his companions had encountered during their long adventuring careers. To them, it almost felt as though the dungeon itself was resisting their intrusion. Alan understood that the members of his party did not lack strength. The real problem was the unusual nature of the dungeon itself. Because of the overwhelming number of monsters constantly appearing, their recovery resources were steadily being drained. That was when Alan discovered Lin. A healer who could properly support a party as strong as his was extremely rare. At the time, Alan and his companions had been lingering around the guild while nearly giving up hope of finding someone suitable. By pure coincidence, they encountered Lin, a talented girl with a high level cap and 3 priest-type skills. To Alan, it felt like a miracle. However, Eris remained concerned. She pointed out that if they spent too much time waiting for Lin to grow stronger, Balzark's party might surpass them and claim the keys first. Among all the adventurers gathered in the area, Balzark's group was the only one Alan considered truly exceptional. Alan calmly admitted that Balzark's party was likely equal to theirs in strength. That's exactly why. Eris shouted in frustration. Despite her concern, Alan simply smiled and assured her that everything would be fine. He explained that Balzark's party also suffered from healer shortage. Furthermore, Alan doubted that adventurers from an unfamiliar region would willingly cooperate with someone as infamous as Balzark. Eris fell silent after hearing his reasoning. Alan then reminded her that the king's request involved finding 3 keys in total. Even if Balzark's group managed to obtain one of them first, it would not become a major problem. After hearing that, Eris quietly muttered in agreement. Her eyes filled with determination as she declared that as long as their party obtained all the keys in the end, everything would work out. She then stated that she would continue following the decisions of their leader. Alan asked if there was any new information regarding the other dungeons. Eris replied that there was nothing significant at the moment. She explained that Alan's party had taken responsibility for the northern dungeon, while Balzark's group had headed west. Meanwhile, the eastern dungeon, known as the Labyrinth of Verdant Greenery, still remained untouched. Based on the guild's records, Eris explained that the adventurers from Boltana were only capable of managing the middle floors of the dungeons at best. Hearing this, Alan smiled in understanding. Since there was little risk of anyone reaching the deepest levels of the eastern and western dungeons anytime soon, he believed there was no reason to rush. Instead, Alan decided that they should continue taking their time and proceed carefully. Eris quietly agreed, at least for the time being. In Chapter 8, a terrified girl ran through the forest while gasping for breath. Fear filled her eyes as she screamed for help and kept looking back over her shoulder. A beast was chasing her and quickly closing the distance. Just as the monster was about to catch her, a man suddenly appeared. In the next instant, the beast disappeared without a trace. The girl looked at the man with relief before losing consciousness. When the girl opened her eyes again, she found herself inside a shop. The shop owner asked if she was awake. Startled, the girl quickly sat up and asked where she was. The owner explained that she was in Boltana, inside Gale's shop, and that she had been brought there the previous night. He pointed toward Ark and told her that he was the one who carried her there after finding her attacked by monsters. Ark reminded her that before she passed out, he had given her a potion to drink. He then asked if she was feeling all right. The girl's eyes widened in surprise as she realized he was the man from her dream earlier. She immediately shouted that she was fine and thanked him for saving her in such a dangerous situation. She introduced herself as Fatina. Ark then introduced himself in return. Fatina quietly repeated his name, calling him Ark-sama. Before the moment could continue, the shop owner interrupted and mentioned that he had heard a little about the monster from the previous night. He then gently asked if she was willing to explain what had happened. After staying silent for a moment, Fatina explained that she came from a village located south of a dungeon. Monsters would occasionally appear around the area, but the village soldiers and mage had always managed to deal with them. However, the monster from the previous night was completely different. According to her, no one could stop the huge black creature. Ark asked what the monster looked like and whether there had been more than one. Confused, Fatina repeated his question before explaining that there should have only been one monster. Since it was dark, she could not clearly see its appearance. Hearing this, Ark recalled the terrifying roar he had heard earlier. Fatina then added that magic had not worked on the creature at all. She explained that every spell seemed to disappear before even reaching it. The shop owner replied that it was most likely due to magic defense, an ability possessed by some powerful monsters. He explained that it acted like a wall surrounding the monster's body, causing magic attacks to bounce away harmlessly. Ark silently thought about the mention of stronger monsters. Fatina continued her story, saying that once everyone realized neither swords nor magic were effective, the villagers scattered in fear. Unfortunately, the monster chose to chase her, and that was when Ark saved her life. The shop owner nodded and said that if the villagers had scattered, some of them might have escaped to nearby villages or taken shelter in Boltana. Hearing this, Fatina suddenly jumped out of bed and exclaimed that she needed to find the others immediately. However, the moment she stood up, her legs gave out beneath her. Before she could fall, Ark quickly caught her. He calmly told her that she still had not fully recovered and should take it easy for now. Embarrassed, Fatina blushed and thanked him once again, though she insisted that she was fine and needed to go immediately. The store owner told Fatina to calm down and wait for a moment. He explained that even if she wanted to search for her friends, she could not go out looking the way she currently did. He at least wanted her to change into the clothes he had prepared and eat something first. However, Fatina quickly interrupted him, saying she could never ask him to do that much for her. Hearing this, the store owner changed his tone and told her he would put it another way. He angrily asked if she realized the kind of trouble it would cause if people saw a girl dressed like that coming out of his shop. He dramatically declared that it was a life or death matter for him. Afterward, the shop owner called Ark over and told him to come eat breakfast with him. A short while later, the three of them sat together and ate. The shop owner let out a deep sigh and muttered in exhaustion. Ark quietly stared at him, causing the owner to ask what he was looking at. Ark simply replied that it was nothing. While eating the bread, Ark silently thought about how good it tasted. He also realized that Gale was actually a very caring person, especially after allowing them to stay the night and helping them so much. Once breakfast was finished, Fatina, Ark, and Gale headed toward Fatina's village. When they arrived, the village was in terrible condition. Exhausted soldiers rested nearby, while the cries of villagers echoed throughout the area. Others were busy treating the wounded. One person commented that the village had suffered serious damage. Gale added that even before the recent increase in monster attacks, they had already been lacking soldiers. Fatina anxiously looked around the village, desperately searching for familiar faces. Nearby, a leader stood before the troops and ordered them to split up and search the surrounding villages. He instructed them to check on evacuees and assess the damage in other areas. The leader also handed over a letter that needed to be delivered to the third port and gave permission to use a fast horse if necessary. The soldiers immediately responded in unison. The leader then declared that he would handle matters with the guild while the others focused on managing the situation in the village. Once again, the soldiers loudly acknowledged his orders. At that moment, two women noticed Fatina. She gasped before immediately running toward them and calling out to her aunt. Her aunt looked relieved and asked if Fatina was truly safe. Ark and Gale silently watched the emotional reunion. Fatina's aunt explained that they still did not know whether every villager had survived, but thankfully, the people who managed to escape there were not seriously injured because of the soldiers' help. Hearing this, Fatina smiled in relief and said she was glad they had found them safe. Meanwhile, Ark quietly began walking away. In his mind, he thought about what he needed to do next. Gale quickly noticed and asked where he was going. Ark calmly replied that he was going after the monster. Shocked, Gale shouted that Ark was talking crazily again. Fatina looked at them in confusion as Ark explained that everyone was already short on manpower. He pointed out that with the current situation, there was no telling how long the monster would continue roaming unchecked. Because of that, he believed it was fine for him to defeat it himself. Gale questioned where all of Ark's confidence was coming from. Deep down, Ark admitted to himself that one reason was because he wanted to defeat a powerful monster and absorb its strength. However, he also knew that if the area's security completely collapsed, it would only make things worse for everyone. Suddenly, Fatina called out and asked them to wait. She declared that if Ark was truly going after the monster, then she wanted to join him. Her aunt looked at her in shock while Ark silently stared at her. Fatina firmly stated that she wanted to help in any way she could. Even as her aunt tried to stop her, Fatina stepped forward and begged Ark to listen to her. She explained that her parents had died from illness when she was still young, and after that, the villagers had raised and cared for her. Now, she wanted to protect them in return and do everything within her power to save them. Fatina bowed deeply and pleaded for Ark to let her fight alongside him. Ark sighed as he tried to respond, but Gale interrupted him before he could finish. Gale told Fatina that he respected her determination. However, if she truly wanted to fight beside Ark, then she would first need the strength of an adventurer. Gale then suggested that they first head to the guild for skill appraisal. He explained that if Fatina truly had the power to fight, then that would be one thing. However, if she lacked the ability, then she would have to give up on joining the battle. He asked her what she thought about the idea. Fatina quickly agreed, saying that he was right and that she understood. Satisfied with her response, Gale loudly declared that it was settled. He then grabbed Ark by the shoulder and told him to just go along with the plan. Ark let out a confused gasp, but Gale continued speaking, saying that he was already busy enough as it was and had already helped Ark plenty. According to him, that should have been more than enough. Fatina then looked at Ark with excitement, eagerly waiting for his answer. After letting out a sigh, Ark finally agreed. Before they left, Gale told them to return to the store once they were finished. Fatina happily thanked him, then excitedly called for Ark to hurry along with her. Meanwhile, her aunt quietly muttered in disbelief at Fatina's behavior. Once they arrived at the guild, Fatina noticed that Ark had put on a hood and asked him why he was hiding himself like that. Ark hesitated to answer and awkwardly tried to change the subject instead. He pointed toward a counter and told her to register as an adventurer there. He explained that new adventurers received a free skill appraisal. After some time passed, the guild employee named Emmy suddenly trembled in shock. In disbelief, she muttered that there was no way the results could be correct. The woman beside her also reacted with amazement. Seeing their reactions, Fatina nervously asked whether her abilities were bad. Emmy immediately shouted that it was the complete opposite. She excitedly explained that Fatina's level cap was 100. Fatina innocently asked whether that was impressive. Emmy enthusiastically replied that it was far beyond impressive. She explained that the guild had never once seen someone with a level cap of 100 before. The woman beside her added even more shocking news. Fatina possessed not one or two, but 4 different skills. The surrounding adventurers immediately erupted into shock and excitement. The appraisal revealed Fatina's 4 abilities. The first was swordsmanship, an extraordinary sword talent considered the highest class of sword skill. The second was supplemental growth, which greatly improved her stat growth whenever she leveled up. The third was magic breaker, a skill that granted strong resistance against magic and similar powers. Finally, she possessed holy magic, allowing her to use healing and other sacred abilities. After hearing all of this, Ark silently concluded that Fatina had a flawless build for a frontline fighter. Fatina herself was overjoyed that she truly had the ability to fight. However, the moment the appraisal ended, a huge number of adventurers rushed toward her, all trying desperately to recruit her into their parties. Fortunately, Ark had already expected such a reaction. Before the crowd could completely surround her, he quickly grabbed Fatina and escaped the guild with her. After finally getting away, Fatina panted heavily in exhaustion and admitted that the situation had been shocking. She sincerely thanked Ark for helping her escape. Ark simply gave a short reply. Fatina then happily commented that she never realized adventurers were so passionate when it came to recruiting party members. She admitted that she still had a lot to learn. Meanwhile, Ark quietly thought to himself that he had acted with good intentions. Considering Fatina's incredible talent, he believed it might have been better for her to join a proper and experienced party instead. The situation reminded him of something from his past. Before he could continue thinking, Fatina suddenly called out to him and asked whether he had a party of his own. Ark fell silent for a moment before finally revealing the truth. He explained that his level cap was only level 1 and that his only skill was instant death magic. Instead of reacting negatively, Fatina brightly asked if that meant he was fighting alone. She then eagerly wondered whether her abilities would be useful if they fought together. Caught completely off guard by her reaction, Ark stared at her in confusion. Deep down, he had expected her to react differently after hearing about his limitations. However, Fatina simply smiled and explained that although many adventurers had tried to recruit her earlier, if she were ever going to form a party, then the only person she wanted to join was Ark. She explained that she had already made that decision the moment she asked to accompany him. Ark asked Fatina why she was willing to go so far for him. Deep in his thoughts, he admitted that he had never expected such a response from her. Fatina explained that earlier that morning, Gale had told her everything that happened after he saved her in the forest. She learned that Ark had carried her on his back all the way through the night, while searching everywhere for a safe place for her to rest. In the end, he had even gone to Gale's shop and personally asked for help on her behalf. Because of everything he had done, Fatina said she believed Ark was the kind of person she could trust more than anyone else. That was exactly why she wanted to fight beside him if she was going into battle with anyone. Ark quietly fell silent as he listened to her words. Fatina then nervously asked whether her reason was not good enough. Ark shook his head and replied that he understood. Quietly, he whispered to himself that her answer was far more than he could have ever hoped for. After gathering his thoughts, Ark asked Fatina if she would form a party with him. He declared that they would defeat the monster together. Fatina immediately accepted with excitement, and the two shook hands. She happily said yes, while Ark replied that he would be counting on her from now on. Afterward, the two returned to Gale's shop and explained everything to him. Gale listened with an expression that clearly showed he had expected things to turn out this way all along, which irritated Ark slightly. Gale commented that a level cap of 1 paired with a level cap of 100 certainly made for an unusual combination. Still, he admitted that such a mismatched pair sounded interesting. Ark then asked if Gale was not worried after hearing about his supposedly useless abilities. Gale loudly replied that he had definitely been shocked to learn Ark was the rumored weakest adventurer. However, he had also heard the stories from the guild about Ark defeating the skeleton ogre and the brawl ape the previous day. Because of that, Gale believed Ark must actually be incredibly strong. Curious, Ark asked what Gale meant by that. Gale simply chuckled and commented that Ark had become curious now. He then opened up a box and explained that since they planned on heading into a dungeon to level up, Fatina would need proper equipment. He revealed that he had already gathered gear suited for a frontline swordswoman along with other necessities. Fatina stared at the equipment in amazement, but quickly admitted that she did not have any money to pay for it. Gale casually replied that Ark had already provided more than enough for the expenses, so she did not need to worry about it. Excited, Fatina turned toward Ark and asked if that was really true. Meanwhile, Ark silently glared at Gale and wondered just how much the old shopkeeper had managed to profit from them. Gale then explained that since Fatina would likely be fighting on the upper floors of the dungeon, ordinary armor would be sufficient for now. However, the real issue would be her weapon. He explained that Fatina's swordmaster skill would place tremendous strain on normal blades, so he had prepared something special for her because of that. With those words, Gale presented Fatina with a silver sword. Gale explained that silver possessed anti-magic properties, making the weapon especially effective against undead monsters. He proudly stated that it was the finest sword he currently had in stock. Fatina looked at the silver sword in awe and exclaimed that such a valuable item was incredible. She promised that she would treasure it dearly. Right after that, Gale suddenly pulled Ark toward him and handed him a short sword as well. He explained that even though Ark was a mage without proper combat skills, the weapon could still be useful in close-range situations if things became dangerous. As Ark accepted the sword, he silently wondered if Gale was showing obvious favoritism toward Fatina. Once everything was prepared, Gale escorted them outside to send them off. Fatina sincerely thanked him for all his help. Gale replied by reminding them to stay careful and make sure to watch each other's backs while fighting. Ark casually responded that everything was already insured anyway. While traveling toward the dungeon, Ark explained his own abilities to Fatina along with what he knew about how adventurers gained levels and experience. During the conversation, Ark suddenly brought up another matter. Since they were now party members, he asked if Fatina could stop calling him Ark-sama. However, Fatina immediately refused. She loudly declared that the two matters were completely different. In her eyes, becoming party members did not change the fact that Ark had saved her life. Ark awkwardly asked if she really had to keep using the honorific. Fatina firmly replied that she absolutely did. Hearing her stubborn answer, Ark simply gave up and said that he understood. Eventually, the two arrived at the eastern dungeon. Ark explained that from that point onward, they would be fighting monsters on the upper floors. Since only the person who dealt the finishing blow gained experience, Fatina would need to take the lead in battle while he supported her from behind. He reassured her that as long as the enemies were around D rank level, he could still provide support without problems, so she did not need to worry. Fatina enthusiastically replied that she would be relying on him. Meanwhile, Ark quietly worried to himself. Since he had never personally experienced the normal leveling system or fought using ordinary skills, he was unsure how smoothly things would go. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the area. Both Ark and Fatina immediately turned toward the source of the sound. Moments later, a man came running toward them while desperately shouting for someone to save him. Chasing after the terrified man were several goblins along with a large orc. The orc glared at Ark and Fatina with fierce hostility, causing Fatina's face to tense with nervousness. The man desperately fled from the monsters, panic written across his face as he ran for his life. Watching the scene unfold, Ark was stunned by the sudden appearance of dungeon monsters outside their usual territory. Confusion filled his mind as he wondered what was happening. Before he could think further, Fatina's voice snapped him back to reality. The fleeing man tripped and crashed on the ground while several goblins slowly closed in on him, their weapons raised and ready to strike. Realizing the danger, Fatina immediately understood that they had to help him. Ark agreed, though he noted to himself that this would become their first experience in actual combat. Without hesitation, Fatina rushed forward. In one swift motion, she cut down a goblin with a single strike, defeating it instantly. Ark watched in shock. Despite her earlier claims that she had never even casually held a sword before, she moved with flawless precision. One goblin after another fell beneath her blade in swift, clean strikes. Ark could hardly believe the overwhelming strength of the swordmaster skill. As Fatina fought, she herself was amazed. She could naturally read the movements of her enemies and instinctively understood how to swing her sword. Tightening her grip on the weapon, she realized that this was her power, the power she possessed to protect others. Suddenly, a massive beast appeared behind her. Ark immediately shouted a warning. In the next instant, the orc's arm was sent flying through the air as Fatina sliced cleanly through its body with incredible speed. The orc collapsed lifelessly onto the ground while Ark stared in amazement at how fast she was. The rescued man could only mutter in disbelief as he struggled to catch his breath. Then, without warning, a hand placed a bottle on top of his head. Startled, the man quickly jumped to his feet and turned toward Ark. Ark calmly asked what had happened. The man shouted in frustration that he wanted to know the same thing. According to him, monsters had suddenly burst out from the dungeon walls without warning. As he spoke, however, he suddenly realized who Ark was. Trembling, he hesitated, remembering what had happened earlier at the guild. Ark told him to forget about the incident, and instead asked where his companions were. The man quickly explained that the others were still below, trapped and under attack. Overcome with desperation, he knelt down and begged Ark and Fatina to save them. Without wasting another second, Ark and Fatina rushed deeper into the dungeon. When they arrived at a lower floor, they stopped and looked down upon a group of adventurers surrounded by savage beasts. Fear and panic filled the air as the trapped men desperately tried to fend off the monsters. One of them shouted for the creatures to stay back, while another cursed in terror, unable to understand what was happening. An orc suddenly roared and charged toward its prey. Before it could strike, Ark's boot slammed directly into its face, stopping the attack instantly and sending the beast staggering backward. The adventurers froze in shock at the sudden intervention. At the same moment, Fatina dashed into battle beside Ark. Leaping into the fray, she cut through the orc's body with a single slash. Ark called out to her, and together they charged through the remaining monsters, blocking their path. Fatina effortlessly defeated even a skeleton monster in one swift strike. Watching her fight, Ark realized that she had likely already grown stronger from the earlier battles. Even against D-rank enemies, her strength was completely overwhelming. Her supplemental growth skill was proving to be extraordinary. The sounds of their attacks echoed throughout the dungeon as the adventurers watched in astonishment. Among them, one thought stood out clearly in their minds. Fatina was unbelievably strong. Another adventurer silently wondered who Fatina truly was as she stood calmly among the corpses of the defeated beasts. Letting out a small sigh, Fatina remained beside Ark while the rescued men hesitated, still struggling to process that they had truly been saved. Concerned, Fatina quickly asked if everyone was all right. After a few moments, the tension in the air slowly began to fade. One of the men admitted that Ark and Fatina had genuinely saved their lives, while another apologized for his earlier behavior. A third awkwardly thanked them, admitting their actions had been wrong. Ark brushed the matter aside, saying he no longer cared about what had happened before. Instead, he focused on a more important issue and demanded to know where all the monsters had come from. It was not only strange that monsters had appeared on the upper floors, but even the dungeon entrance had been overrun. One of the men repeated what he had said earlier. The monsters had suddenly burst out from the walls themselves. Even now, he could hardly believe it. Another adventurer, still pale with fear, explained that there had been absolutely nothing there one moment, and then suddenly the monsters were surrounding them. There had been no footsteps, no breathing, and no warning at all. Fatina asked whether such events were normal inside dungeons. The adventurer quickly denied it, saying he had never heard of anything like this before. Their group had visited the dungeon many times, yet nothing remotely similar had ever happened. As Ark listened, unease settled in his mind. Between the mysterious appearance of the monsters and the earlier encounter with the skeleton ogre, it was obvious that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, Fatina's ears twitched sharply. Her expression hardened as she focused on a distant sound. Ark immediately noticed the change and asked what she had heard. Fatina explained that she could hear footsteps and screams coming from deeper inside the dungeon. One of the men gasped in surprise, while another muttered that he could not hear anything at all. Fatina calmly explained that beastkin possessed far sharper hearing than humans. Moments later, she warned everyone that something was approaching. In the distance, a group of adventurers suddenly appeared, running desperately with terror written across their faces. Behind them loomed a massive figure. One of the men began shouting in alarm just as the giant creature fully emerged from the shadows. It was an ogre. Panic immediately spread among the adventurers as they screamed and fled for their lives. Seeing the chaos unfold, Ark realized they needed to get the others to safety before the situation became even worse. Ark shouted for the adventurers to focus on evacuating the people while he and Fatina dealt with the ogre. Without hesitation, Fatina responded and charged forward beside him. The towering ogre swung its enormous fist toward them. Ark narrowly avoided the crushing attack, instantly realizing that this was no undead creature like the skeleton ogre from before. This ogre possessed living flesh and blood, and despite its massive body, it moved with frightening speed. Fatina quickly circled behind the monster, but the ogre immediately noticed her movement and snapped its gaze toward her. Slightly surprised by its awareness, she reacted just as the beast hurled a massive stone in her direction. Fatina gracefully dodged the projectile, her movements swift and precise. The adventurers could only watch nervously as the fierce battle unfolded before them. Ark rapidly assessed the situation. Even weakened, the ogre would still be at least a C-rank threat, and without obstacles restricting its movement, it was even more dangerous. Still, after witnessing Fatina's earlier battles and the rapid growth granted by her abilities, he believed she could handle the monster if given the right opportunity. Calling out to her, Ark declared that he would act as a decoy. He immediately cast a spell and launched it toward the ogre. The monster casually swatted the attack aside with a single hand, but the distraction created the opening they needed. Fatina rushed forward at incredible speed. Closing the distance in an instant, she slashed through the ogre's leg. The beast roared in pain as it clutched the wounded limb. Using that moment, Fatina leapt high into the air. Her sword flashed brilliantly as she aimed directly for the ogre's mouth. Watching her movements, Ark could not help but marvel at the overwhelming power of high-rank skills. Fatina's blade pierced deeply into the ogre's mouth before she quickly kicked away from its body and landed safely back on the ground. The adventurers froze in place, their eyes wide with disbelief as the ogre's massive body crashed heavily onto the dungeon floor. The thunderous impact echoed throughout the cavern while silence settled over everyone present. Watching Fatina stand victorious, Ark realized that despite having only recently become an adventurer, she already possessed the strength of a first-rate fighter. Fatina landed gracefully on the ground as the stunned adventurers continued staring at her in amazement. Before long, whispers of awe spread among them. For a brief moment, Ark found himself wondering what it would be like to possess such a powerful skill himself. However, Fatina's voice quickly pulled him from his thoughts as she asked whether everyone was all right. Ark silently dismissed his own thoughts, realizing that dwelling on what he lacked would change nothing. Afterward, the group made their way out of the dungeon together. Ark observed that fortunately no one appeared to be seriously injured. Still, he advised everyone to remain together and return to town carefully, just in case more monsters appeared. Fatina then asked what they themselves should do. Ark answered that they would also head back for now, explaining that continuing deeper into the dungeon under the current circumstances would be too dangerous. Suddenly, something occurred to Ark, causing him to stop abruptly. Fatina immediately noticed and asked what was wrong. Ark muttered about the monsters Fatina had defeated earlier and asked whether there had really been so few of them. Fatina admitted that she had been too focused on fighting to properly keep count and apologized. Ark quickly told her it was not her fault. Still, unease lingered in his mind. Since the monsters had not been killed through instant death magic, the dead coffin skill should not have activated. The entire situation made no sense to him. Wondering what exactly was happening inside the dungeon, Ark urged everyone to move out. As they departed, the corpse of the defeated orc slowly faded away. Half a day later, the guild had descended into chaos. Overwhelmed by the flood of alarming reports, Emmy desperately asked what was happening. Adventurers loudly explained that orcs had suddenly burst out from the dungeon walls without warning. Others added that ogres and even skeleton monsters had appeared on the upper floors. Rumors quickly spread that Boltana's dungeon might no longer be safe, and some adventurers were already considering leaving town altogether. One particularly agitated adventurer accused the guild of hiding information and demanded answers. Watching the commotion unfold, Fatina quietly remarked that things seemed to be spiraling out of control. Ark silently agreed. He suspected that at least some adventurers or guild members understood more about the situation than they were admitting. Too many strange incidents were occurring at once. Powerful monsters were appearing where they should not exist, mysterious black creatures had emerged, and monsters were now materializing directly from the dungeon walls themselves. Ark began wondering whether the cause of all these abnormalities was somehow connected to the dungeon itself. Breaking the silence, Ark called out to Fatina. She immediately responded respectfully. Ark explained that fighting visible enemies was one matter, but both of them were still complete amateurs when it came to understanding the deeper mysteries of dungeons. For now, he believed it would be wiser to focus their attention on the mysterious black monster instead. He also mentioned that the older women traveling with them could remain safely at the inn. Fatina stared at him with renewed determination shining in her eyes. Agreeing with his reasoning, she declared that she still needed to become even stronger. Seeing her spirits recover somewhat, Ark quietly felt relieved. Meanwhile, at the Eastern Gate watchtower overlooking Boltana, several guards discussed the growing unrest. One guard mentioned hearing that the guild was in an uproar over the Eastern Dungeon. Another casually wondered whether the monsters had begun increasing again, questioning how the adventurers could still be struggling despite the recent influx of new recruits. The first guard pointed out that the dungeon had existed for ages without ever causing such disturbances before. He added that, according to rumors, many of the newer adventurers were simply too weak to handle the situation. As the conversation continued, one of the guards silently peered through a scope toward the horizon. When he failed to respond, The other guard called out to him impatiently, only to stop mid-sentence upon noticing the man, trembling in fear. Confused, the guard asked what was wrong. With horror written across his face, the trembling man muttered in disbelief as he stared into the distance, wondering what exactly he was looking at. In Chapter 10, everyone gathered in front of the Adventurers Guild as the chief of the Boltana branch addressed the anxious crowd. He explained that monster activity in and around the dungeons had been increasing, while the government was already struggling with a shortage of manpower. With the attacks that had occurred the previous day and the latest incident inside the dungeon, the authorities had decided to take immediate action. The government requested the guild's cooperation and sought to recruit mercenaries from among the adventurers to help handle the growing threat. Gaston repeated the announcement to himself, reflecting on how drastic it was for the government to rely on adventurers as mercenaries. From a management perspective, it was a risky decision. Adventurers were notoriously difficult to discipline, yet a swift response would at least reassure the townspeople. As the guild receptionist distributed papers detailing the requirements, the adventurers examined them with mixed reactions. Some were tempted by the generous pay, while others reasoned that such high compensation could only mean the work was extremely dangerous. After hearing about the recent incidents, many were hesitant to get involved. Doug openly complained that the whole situation sounded like a troublesome mess and insisted there was no chance he would participate. Even after several moments passed, not a single adventurer stepped forward. During the uneasy silence, Gaston turned his attention to Ark and remarked in surprise that he never expected Ark to form a party. Fatina cheerfully introduced herself and asked everyone to take care of her as well. Gaston narrowed his eyes slightly, almost overwhelmed by her bright personality, before placing his hands on Ark's shoulders and expressing how genuinely happy he was for him. Ark, confused by the reaction, questioned a strange look on Gaston's face. Doug immediately teased them, claiming it was only natural for Ark to choose teaming up with a girl over partnering with an older man like Gaston. Gaston loudly protested the insult, while Ark brushed the exchange aside and explained that he and Fatina intended to accept the mission. He asked the others to share information if they learned anything important. Gaston agreed without hesitation. Thanks to Ark and Fatina, they already understood how dangerous the dungeon had become. Monsters had begun bursting through walls, and incidents like the appearance of the skeleton ogre continued occurring without explanation, throwing everyone into confusion. Doug suddenly suggested that perhaps they should simply flee somewhere else, only for the others to glare at him as though branding him a coward. He quickly insisted that he had only been joking. At that moment, the atmosphere changed as the sharp sound of a bell echoed through the area. Confusion spread among the crowd, while one woman realized the sound was coming from the eastern side of town. A receptionist hurriedly informed the branch chief, who immediately ordered everyone to remain calm. He explained that the bell was the alarm signal from the gate, and the color of the signal indicated that the town should prepare for maximum alert. Soon after, a guard forced his way through the crowd, shouting desperately for people to move aside. Reaching the front, he delivered horrifying news. A massive swarm of monsters was advancing toward the town. Shock swept through the gathered adventurers and civilians alike. The guard, overwhelmed with fear, explained that the swarm was unbelievably large. Murmurs spread rapidly through the crowd as some struggled to comprehend the situation. Others wondered if the dungeon itself had overflowed. Falling to his knees in terror, the guard corrected himself repeatedly, revealing that there were not merely 100 monsters, but hundreds of them approaching. Fear instantly gripped everyone present. The branch chief quickly regained control of himself and ordered all adventurers to abandon formal procedures and unite to defend the town. Even so, hesitation lingered among the adventurers as the reality of the threat settled over them. Ark silently reflected on whether the monster activity had truly been increasing since that very morning. Meanwhile, Doug trembled in panic, declaring that there was no possible way the people of the town could survive against hundreds of monsters. Azuri anxiously asked what they were supposed to do in the face of the approaching swarm. In the midst of the growing panic, Gaston suddenly stepped forward and declared that there was still something they could do. Ark looked at him in surprise as Gaston instructed everyone to calm down and listen carefully. Gaston explained that there was a known method for dealing with monster swarms like this. Whenever a swarm consisted of mixed species, there was usually a commander controlling the others. If that leader was defeated, the remaining monsters would lose coordination and scatter. One adventurer compared the strategy to cutting off the head of a snake, while another questioned how they were supposed to locate the commander among hundreds of monsters. Gaston clarified that the commander was typically the strongest monster within the swarm. The branch chief immediately confirmed Gaston's explanation, stating that identifying and eliminating the commander was their best option. While the adventurers worked to keep the swarm under control, They had to locate the leader as quickly as possible because there was no time to waste. The adventurers began discussing possible strategies and preparing themselves for the coming battle. Amid the commotion, Fatina noticed Ark quietly moving away and asked where he was going. Ark casually replied that he intended to defeat the commander himself. If what Gaston and the guild had said was true, eliminating it would resolve the crisis. Gaston's eyes widened in shock at Ark's declaration. Nearby adventurers who overheard him began murmuring among themselves, questioning whether he had lost his mind. Ignoring their reactions, Ark stated that time was running out and instructed Fatina to stay behind somewhere safe with the others. However, the moment Ark left, Fatina immediately chased after him, calling for him to wait. Doug and the others watched in astonishment as the two headed toward the battlefield. While terrified townspeople desperately fled away from the eastern gate where the monsters were approaching, Ark ran directly toward the danger. In his thoughts, he noted that the eastern gate was straight down the main street. Just then, he heard someone calling out to him. Turning around, he saw Fatina catching up to him. Ark quickly ordered her to return, but Fatina firmly refused. He warned her that this was a swarm consisting of hundreds of monsters and explained that, unlike him, she could not continue fighting endlessly without exhausting herself. Fatina admitted that he was probably right, but she declared that she could never abandon an ally facing danger alone. As his party member, there was no way she could simply stand by and leave him behind. Fatina refused to go back. Even though Ark had told her not to follow him, she insisted that she would still go with him. Realizing there was no convincing her otherwise, Ark eventually gave up and told her to do whatever she wanted. Fatina confidently declared that she would. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild where everyone had gathered, anxious murmurs filled the hall. Some people could not believe that the two of them were seriously rushing toward the monsters. Others accused Ark of simply making an excuse to run away. A few nervously wondered what they should do next. The receptionist interrupted the commotion and informed everyone that the cloaked man was the same adventurer whose skill appraisal showed a level limit of 1. Shock spread through the guild hall. Some angrily claimed that he had run off after all, while others mocked him as the weakest scum. The branch chief quickly stepped in, reminding everyone that this was not the time for such arguments. As Gaston listened to the slander, he thought bitterly that the crowd was saying whatever they pleased. However, he also realized that he should have understood much sooner. Ark's instant death magic had been enough proof that he was the adventurer everyone had been talking about. Gaston stepped forward and called for everyone to listen. He told them that whether they believed him or not, the man named Ark was stronger than anyone currently present. Ark was not the kind of person who would run away. Just like before, he had simply rushed ahead on his own. Gaston continued by revealing that the skeleton ogre he had previously reported to the guild had actually been defeated by Ark. In his heart, Gaston believed that Ark was more sincere and earnest than anyone else. A man in the crowd scoffed and dismissed the story as nonsense, but a woman shouted that it was true. Doug questioned Gaston about what he meant, yet Gaston ignored him and continued speaking to the crowd. He explained that all they needed to do was hold back the swarm and buy Ark and Fatina some time. However, the crowd reacted negatively. One person shouted that they could never defeat so many monsters. Gaston argued that if everyone worked together and focused on defense, they could at least hold the monsters back. At the same time, the receptionist quietly mentioned to the branch chief that Ark was also the adventurer who had brought in the killing bear. Despite this, the crowd continued protesting loudly. Some insisted that such claims were impossible to believe. Others demanded to know who would take responsibility if they failed. A few suggested fleeing west, while others declared that anyone who wanted to fight could do so alone. Hearing all the complaints and fear around him, Gaston cursed inwardly and wondered what he could possibly do. Just then, someone arrived and stated that if they were discussing that matter, they also knew the truth about it. Meanwhile, at the eastern gate, the guards busily prepared for the approaching swarm of monsters. The commander ordered them to gather every available troop and guard while using any nearby materials to construct barricades. Non-combatants were instructed to evacuate toward the west since there was not enough manpower to escort them safely. The commander suddenly paused when he noticed two people running toward the gate. He called out to them, demanding to know what they were doing and urging them to hurry to shelter. However, before he could finish speaking, Ark and Fatina rushed straight past him without slowing down. The two quickly slipped through the gate. One of the guards gasped in shock and asked the commander who those people were. He then announced that he was lowering the portcullis. Meanwhile, Ark and Fatina continued running forward. After covering some distance, Ark suddenly stopped and signaled for Fatina to stop as well. He told her that before facing the monsters, they needed to organize their thoughts. Fatina nodded in agreement and stated that their main target was the monster acting as the commander. However, she also wanted to reduce the pressure on the town as much as possible. Ark replied that they did not need to defeat every monster and only had to stop as many as they could. As he thought to himself, Ark realized that he likely would not be able to fire his death magic quickly enough. Because of that, he understood that he would need to rely on ordinary weapons as well. Ark then told Fatina that although it was a difficult request, she needed to remember the recovery effect that occurred whenever she leveled up. Fatina answered that she understood. As the two walked together toward the swarm, Ark suddenly called out to her once more. Fatina urged him to continue. Ark quietly thanked her, and hearing those words, Fatina smiled warmly. After closing the distance between themselves and the monsters, Ark and Fatina lunged forward and began their attack. In Chapter 11, Fatina and Ark rushed toward the incoming swarm of monsters. As they closed the distance, the monsters' formation began to scatter. Several monsters were defeated instantly, but many still remained, and the two were quickly surrounded. Ark swung his blade and cut down two monsters immediately. When an ogre charged toward him, he cast his instant death skill, causing the creature to collapse on the spot. However, another group of monsters quickly surrounded him again. Ark realized there was no time to rapid-fire the skill, and he decided to save his death magic for stronger enemies. Worried about Fatina, Ark glanced toward where she was fighting. She too was surrounded by numerous monsters, but with swift and precise movements, she cut them down one after another. Seeing this, Ark realized that she seemed to be managing just fine. Fatina turned toward the monster ahead of her and sliced horizontally, cutting the ogre clean in half. She slipped past the falling body and immediately defeated another monster attempting to surround her. Meanwhile, on Ark's side, an explosion erupted in front of him as two ogres charged at once, knocking smaller monsters into the air as they forced their way through. Ark anxiously thought that he was on his own now and wondered if he could handle the situation. There was no time to doubt himself as the ogres closed in. Ark leapt over one of the ogres, thinking that this was nothing compared to his battle against the skeleton before. Shouting loudly, he lunged toward the ogre's face, grabbed its horn, and activated his death skill. The monster collapsed instantly. Without stopping, Ark jumped toward the second massive ogre. Just as it raised its arm to attack him, a massive fist struck the ogre's face. The creature staggered back and turned toward Ark again. Ark then activated his dead coffin skill, summoning the giant ogre he had just defeated. He mockingly told the remaining ogre that it could have its companion back before hurling the corpse toward it. The massive body slammed into the remaining ogre, sending both crashing to the ground. Fatina, who witnessed the scene, remarked that it was amazing. Ark panted heavily, wondering how effective the attack had been. His thoughts trailed off when he noticed the goblins still standing their ground. His eyes widened in shock. Even after witnessing the fall of the two powerful ogres, the goblins had not flinched. Ark realized then how much difference a commander could make. Suddenly, the monsters shifted their focus. Fatina quickly warned Ark, and he realized that the monsters' attention had changed from the two of them to the town itself. They would not be able to cover everything. However, Ark then noticed something unexpected. The gate behind them was still open. Confused, he wondered what was happening. A rumbling sound suddenly echoed from the eastern gate, and figures began emerging through the dust. Fatina exclaimed in relief as she recognized them as reinforcements. As they rushed forward, Gaston shouted for everyone to push the monsters back, declaring that the adventurers would protect their town. At the same time, the commander ordered the rear guards to halt while instructing the archers and mages to begin their assault. "Fire at will," he shouted. Flaming arrows rained from the sky and struck the monsters. Gaston yelled for the men to charge, and immediately everyone scattered across the battlefield to engage the monsters. A large, muscular man swung his massive sword, cutting down several monsters at once. His companions gasped in admiration, declaring that this was exactly what they would expect from their boss, a former B-rank adventurer. The bulky man reminded them that dismantlers knew the weak points of monsters better than anyone, so everyone should give their all. His companions answered enthusiastically. Meanwhile, Ark scanned the battlefield carefully. Gaston then called out to him, telling him to leave the rear lines to them and focus instead on the commander. Ark replied that he understood and immediately told Fatina to come with him. She agreed without hesitation. Near the gate, Doug carried more arrows and potions to the front before quickly turning back to retrieve another load. At the same time, the commander issued rapid orders to the troops. The injured were to retreat immediately and receive treatment from the clerics. He warned the soldiers not to allow the front lines to weaken. Long-range attacks from archers and mages were to continue wherever allies were absent, and any monsters that broke through were to be overwhelmed with superior numbers. In his thoughts, the commander admitted that the adventurers' arrival had allowed them to focus on coordinating the battle from the rear, but even with that advantage, they were barely maintaining the line. They could not afford to lower their guard. The monster commander had to be defeated as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a deep and menacing growl echoed across the battlefield. A massive monster stepped forward, spreading a dark aura through the air. Gaston's eyes widened in shock, while the commander's face twisted in horror as he shouted that the situation was absurd. The creature before them was a chimera. The chimera possessed the body of a lion, a goat's head, and the tail of a snake. Its danger level was extraordinarily high because all three parts could use their abilities simultaneously. Its strength exceeded rank A. Ark froze upon seeing it. Gaston clenched his teeth, wondering if the creature truly was a chimera, as he had never heard of one with such a dark appearance before. One man shuddered and questioned why the tail was made entirely of bones, while another wondered if it had mutated. The creature looked like darkness itself, almost like a living shadow. Ark quickly realized that this monster had to be the boss. It was not merely powerful. It was an irregular monster and likely the core of the entire horde, the true commander. Ark glanced toward Fatina and saw that she was trembling, completely frozen in place. With a shaking voice, she revealed that this was the same monster that had attacked her village. Ark quietly replied that he understood. In his thoughts, Ark realized that this explained the mystery of the three cries they had heard before. The scream from earlier had likely come from the snake portion of the chimera. The skeletal appearance of the tail might also indicate that the effects of death magic could not fully reach its core. If that was true, then targeting the lion's main body directly might be the key. Suddenly, the chimera lunged toward them. Fatina gasped in alarm, shouting that it was heading straight for them. Without hesitation, Ark activated his quadruple death burial. As the chimera charged forward, people across the battlefield shouted warnings for Ark to be careful. Ark responded calmly that he would be fine. In his mind, he reasoned that if they could defeat this monster, the entire battle would finally calm down. Everyone was nearing exhaustion, and if the fight dragged on much longer, they would all be wiped out. He decided that everything would be settled here. The moment the chimera came within range, Ark unleashed his death skill. However, a barrier suddenly appeared and completely nullified the attack. The chimera appeared to mock Ark as his attack failed. Inwardly, Ark cursed, realizing that the creature was protected by Satan's protection. He understood then that he had rushed too quickly in his attempt to defeat it. As the chimera closed the distance, Fatina suddenly leapt forward and shoved Ark out of harm's way. The impact sent her flying through the air. Ark immediately called out, asking if she was all right. Nearby, one of the soldiers gasped in shock upon realizing that the chimera possessed magical defenses. Another exclaimed that no one could have expected such an ability from the creature. The chimera then shifted its attention toward the soldiers. Fear spread instantly among the men. One soldier panicked and fled, shouting that the monster was coming. The chimera pursued them mercilessly and lashed out with its skeletal tail, striking the fleeing soldiers. Those who witnessed the attack stood frozen in shock. One man muttered in disbelief that the tail could still move like that despite its skeletal state. A woman gasped that it moved like a bladed whip. Panic quickly spread through the troops as voices rang out in despair. They shouted that the situation was hopeless. The goat's head could block magic, and the creature itself moved far too quickly. At that moment, Fatina slowly stood back up. Ark panted heavily, realizing that unlike their battle in the forest, the chimera could now react whenever it sensed his magic approaching. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Fatina stepping forward once more. Ark called out to her, but Fatina simply declared that she guessed it was her turn now. The attackers realized that the chimera possessed magical defense, so one of the men shouted that they should all charge at once. However, the moment the creature turned its tail toward them, it unleashed a heavy breath from its mouth. The attack struck three men immediately, freezing them in place. Their weapons clattered to the ground as they stared in shock, desperately trying to force their bodies to move. Gaston clenched his teeth as he recognized what was happening. In his mind, he identified the attack as paralysis combined with heavy breathing, a miasma. Before anyone could react, the chimera released another wave of miasma toward the remaining men, instantly immobilizing them as well. One man gritted his teeth and shouted that the chimera possessed multiple abilities. Another added that neither swords nor magic could reach the monster. A third warrior quickly raised his bow and suggested they try arrows instead. He fired an arrow at the chimera, but the beast effortlessly deflected it with a flick of its tail. The chimera then glanced at the men with what appeared to be a mocking smirk. The warriors stared at it in disbelief. One gasped that the monster was mocking them, while another admitted through clenched teeth that even arrows were useless against such an overwhelming creature. Surrounded by enemies, the chimera released a thunderous roar. As Ark observed the beast, he analyzed its terrifying abilities in his mind. The chimera possessed the physique of a lion, the goat's magical defense, and the snake's miasma breath. Together, those powers made it an extremely dangerous opponent. Ark turned to Fatina and asked what she planned to do, but the chimera's roar only heightened his alarm. He quickly realized that the miasma was spreading faster than expected. Even a swordmaster would not be able to approach the creature safely. His thoughts halted when he saw Fatina step forward. With every step she took, a brilliant light surrounded her. Ark stared in shock as the miasma vanished wherever she walked. Then he understood the reason. It was Magic Breaker. Fatina calmly stated that she believed she could get close to the chimera, and that this battle was her fight as well. She reminded Ark that she had gained plenty of levels and asked him to trust her. Ark realized she was right. Since they had become partners, it would have been reckless for him to act without her. Accepting her resolve, he told her that he understood and that he would leave the goat head to her. A faint smile appeared on Fatina's lips as she advanced toward the chimera. The monster's sharp eyes immediately locked onto her, yet she showed no fear beneath its overwhelming aura. With each step she took, the miasma around her disappeared completely. In her heart, Fatina resolved that she would use every ounce of the power she had been given. Watching from a distance, Ark wondered whether the intense presence he sensed from her was bloodlust or simply sheer courage. Even the chimera reacted to the overwhelming aura she emitted. At the same time, Gaston questioned silently whether Fatina could truly fight such a monster alone, despite the incredible stories he had heard about her ability. The men observing the scene could not hide their admiration. One remarked that she was amazing, while another admitted that simply watching her sent chills down his spine. The chimera lunged forward, and Fatina immediately charged toward it as well. As she closed the distance, she moved toward the creature's side, but the chimera reacted swiftly and turned to face her. In response, Fatina quickly created distance again. The chimera continued launching repeated attacks, while Fatina constantly maneuvered toward its blind spots. Yet each time she attempted to outflank it, the monster responded with equal speed. Clicking her tongue in frustration, Fatina realized that unless she could outmaneuver the beast completely, the battle would drag on endlessly. Watching the fierce exchange, Gaston muttered that the fight was terrifying. Even without the chimera's breath attack, he doubted he could interfere safely. The others could do nothing but watch the clash unfold, none of them daring to step into the battle. Fatina suddenly planted her foot firmly against the ground and rushed forward once more. At the same time, the chimera charged directly toward her. The monster leapt high into the air, but Fatina slipped beneath it with perfect timing. With a swift swing of her sword, she slashed its leg and wounded it. Ark and Gaston both exclaimed in admiration at the impressive move. The chimera landed and growled furiously, while Fatina continued running forward instead of retreating. Gaston stared in confusion, wondering why she was heading toward him. Then Fatina called out to him. In her mind, she knew she could not afford to lose momentum during the counterattack. She quickly asked Gaston to let her use a shield. At the perfect moment, Fatina leapt into the air and landed vertically against Gaston's shield. Using the force like a springboard, she launched herself straight back toward the chimera. Enraged, the chimera lifted its skeletal tail and unleashed a thick cloud of miasma. Fatina forced herself through the poisonous fog. Her breath caught painfully as she struggled against the toxin. Yet she continued pushing forward without hesitation. The moment she reached the chimera's skeleton tail, she shouted and swung her sword with all her strength. The powerful strike shattered the tail instantly. Gaston's jaw dropped in shock as he realized that the combination of Magic Breaker and a silver weapon had succeeded. Ark shouted in relief that the chimera's breath attack had finally been sealed. However, as thick dust filled the battlefield, he anxiously called out to Fatina. The chimera roared violently. As the dust slowly settled, everyone gasped in astonishment upon seeing Fatina clinging to the monster's back. One man shouted in disbelief that she was holding on to it. Ark muttered worriedly that she was reckless, but he also realized that this was their opportunity. Without delay, he activated his quadruple death burial. At the same time, Fatina slammed her sword against the chimera's remaining head, causing the beast to roar even more furiously. The monster thrashed wildly in rage, the violent force snapping Fatina's sword and throwing her high into the air. As she fell, Gaston rushed forward and caught her just in time. Praising her efforts, he told her she had done well. The chimera continued roaring and rampaging until it finally noticed Ark approaching. For a brief moment, the monster flinched. Fatina saw Ark drawing near, and when the chimera opened its massive jaws toward him, she cried out in alarm. Before the creature could swallow him, Ark activated his death skill. Raising his hand toward the chimera, Ark struck the monster instantly as it charged toward him. In a single moment, the creature's life vanished. Its enormous body collapsed heavily onto the battlefield. At the same time, the surrounding swarm of monsters began disappearing one after another. One man gasped that the monsters were vanishing. Near the city gates, Doug shouted that something must have happened because no one on the battlefield was moving anymore. The commander wondered aloud if the chimera had finally been defeated. Gaston quietly murmured, asking if it was truly over at last. Fatina called out to Ark. When the dust finally cleared and everyone saw the chimera lying motionless while Ark stood firmly on the battlefield, relief filled both Gaston and Fatina's eyes. Without hesitation, Fatina rushed toward Ark and leapt into his arms. In Chapter 13, after the intense battle, a victory celebration was held. A woman raised her voice and proposed a toast to everyone who had saved Boltana. Everyone lifted their cups and shouted in unison, "Cheers!" The celebration soon began, and the people freely enjoyed themselves. It had already been a week since the Boltana raid. Damage assessments and restoration plans for the surrounding areas were underway, and everyone was working together to deal with the aftermath. The gathering that day was a small celebration hosted by the Adventurers Guild to commemorate the end of the incident. Fatina remarked that it was finally over. Ark replied that he had heard the monsters in the dungeon had quieted down and that the upper floors were now empty. He explained that the phenomenon of monsters spawning from the walls had been caused by the chimera. Once it was defeated, the minions disappeared as well. Fatina commented that a monster capable of spawning creatures like that was terrifying. Ark agreed and admitted that if it had only been the two of them. However, he was suddenly interrupted by a loud voice. Gale, who appeared slightly drunk, loudly declared that the rookie everyone had looked down on had stood against the skeleton ogre and even faced the monster swarm without hesitation. Yet those same people still dared call themselves adventurers. He called it disgraceful. One man sighed and muttered that Gale was starting again and that he was tired of hearing it. Another pointed out that Gale himself had not even fought. Someone else agreed with the remark. Angered, Gale shouted back, asking what they meant by that. He grabbed one man by the collar and insisted that he had let them use everything in his store, so of course he had contributed. The man replied that none of it would have mattered if they had all died anyway. Another person stepped in and tried to calm Gale down. Someone behind them muttered that despite all the trouble, Gale had managed to rally the adventurers, and the man had contributed as well. The man glanced back and explained that he had family in the town too and could not simply abandon them. Ark and Fatina silently watched the commotion as Gale continued trying to attack the man while others restrained him. Later, Ark learned that Gale had encouraged the hesitant adventurers by showing them the skull as proof that they could rely on Ark realizing this. Ark admitted to himself that they truly could not have handled everything alone and that they were deeply indebted to Gale-san. The other person who had rallied the adventurers was Gaston. Just then, Gaston approached Ark and greeted him, remarking that he was still alive and breathing. Ark replied that he owed Gaston his life once again, but Gaston told him to stop saying things like that. Gaston then explained that he wanted to introduce someone named Hans, who had once served as Hans' subordinate. Hans politely greeted Ark and Fatina, saying that he was pleased to meet them. He explained that he had been leading the defense squad from the rear and believed they had crossed paths at the gate. Ark finally understood. Since Hans had once been Gaston's subordinate, it made sense that the group had coordinated so effectively from the front lines to the rear. Hans replied that he had not expected to meet Gaston there, but in the end, it had turned out to be fortunate. He added that Ark and Fatina's presence had also been crucial during the battle, and there was no better word than brilliant to describe the way they defeated the Shadow Chimera. Because the entire town had united during the fight, the people were now cooperating in mercenary work and reconstruction efforts, allowing everything to progress smoothly. As a soldier, Hans said he wanted to personally thank them as the ones who had set everything in motion. Ark modestly replied that he had merely happened to be there, but before he could continue, Gaston smacked him on the back. Gaston told him that even if he had not accomplished everything alone, it was still an achievement worth being proud of and that he should face it head-on. He declared that Ark was now a full-fledged adventurer. Fatina enthusiastically agreed with Gaston's words. Hearing this, Ark realized that his earlier response had simply been one of his bad habits. He nodded and admitted that Hans was right. The two men then shook hands, and Ark thanked Hans as well for helping them during the battle. At that moment, a group of drunken adventurers suddenly surrounded them. One of them exclaimed that they had finally found the stars of the show. Another told Ark not to stay hidden in the corner and ordered him to come join them. Someone else asked whether they had only recently registered as adventurers and wondered if they were even old enough to drink. Another loudly demanded that the star among stars tell them the full story of the battle. And so, the night continued in a lively celebration. The following morning, outside the building, Fatina stared at her new sword in amazement. Gale had called them over early and explained that the weapon was a masterpiece forged from the bones of the Shadow Chimera. It had been crafted in cooperation with the Guild Dismantler and specially made as a reward for them. Ark thought to himself that Gale must have overdrunk the previous night while celebrating the sword's completion. The weapon would certainly suit them well as they continued exploring dungeons. As for Ark himself, his instant death magic had now reached level 30. He had spent his saved-up points on range level 2 and success rate level 3, along with a new special skill acquired from the chimera. The skill appeared to inflict status effects on opponents. Ark wondered if it originated from the chimera's breath attack. If it could weaken an enemy's performance, then it would be a valuable advantage for him. However, Ark's thoughts abruptly stopped when he saw Fatina swing her new sword. With a single strike, she cleanly sliced a tree in half. Fatina herself trembled in shock before quickly rushing over to Ark and asking if he had seen what just happened. Ark replied flatly that he was indeed surprised. He then recalled Gale mentioning that the sword possessed some kind of special effect. Since it had been crafted from such powerful material, it likely contained a large amount of magical energy. That also explained why materials like those were considered so valuable in trade. Fatina smiled brightly upon hearing the explanation and said she understood now. She added that she would have to thank Gale once again. Emmy approached the two of them, saying that she had heard a loud noise and figured they might be nearby. Fatina greeted her brightly, and Emmy cheerfully returned the greeting with a good morning. Ark asked if she had been looking for them. Emmy replied that she had, explaining that she had received a request concerning the two of them and had come to escort them as requested. Fatina wondered aloud who could possibly be asking for them. Ark quietly muttered that he understood. If it was related to the guild, then he was interested, and since they only had a dungeon investigation plan for the day, they still had enough time. Emmy smiled and politely asked them to follow her, and the two quietly complied. While they were walking, Emmy suddenly called out to Ark. He encouraged her to continue. Hesitantly, she admitted that it might already be too late, but she still wanted to apologize. When she had first seen the results of his ability, she had laughed at them, and she deeply regretted doing so. Fatina looked surprised upon hearing the confession. Ark recalled the day he had received those results and admitted to himself that it truly had happened. However, he reasoned that Emmy had not intended any harm and had simply been shocked. Since the results had not matched anyone's expectations, he could not blame her for reacting that way. In fact, he thought that if he had been in her position, he might have laughed as well. Ark then reassured her that he was no longer bothered by it. On the contrary, thanks to discovering his instant death magic, he had been able to fight and help protect the town. Hearing his response, Emmy wiped a tear from her eye and thanked him sincerely. Fatina watched the exchange with a bright smile as the two reconciled. Not long afterward, they arrived on the second floor of the Adventurers Guild. Emmy informed them that the people who had summoned them were waiting inside the room ahead. When Ark and Fatina entered, they found 3 people already seated inside. One of the women immediately greeted them, saying that they had finally arrived before asking Ark if he was the famous instant death coin. Ark repeated the nickname silently in his mind, confused by it. Emmy then excused herself and quietly left the room. After everyone settled onto the couches, the woman thanked them for responding to the summons. She introduced herself as Cecilia, an S-rank adventurer and the leader of her party. Ark repeated the term S-rank in his thoughts. Cecilia then introduced the woman beside her as Veronica, their cleric, and the man beside them as Leonis, their paladin. Leonis politely greeted Ark and Fatina, saying it was nice to meet them. Ark introduced himself as Ark, a mage, and introduced Fatina as the swordswoman accompanying him. He added that they had only recently been promoted to C-rank adventurers. Cecilia replied that it was nice to meet them as well, before deciding to get straight to the point. She explained that she wanted Ark and Fatina to assist their party in conquering the Eastern Dungeon. Their 5-member team planned to push toward the lower levels. As payment, she offered 100 gold coins up front and an additional 200 upon successful completion. Fatina gasped in shock at the enormous amount and exclaimed that a village could survive for 4 years on 200 gold coins alone. Ark, however, asked Cecilia to wait a moment. He admitted that the situation felt strange to him. Even considering the recent dungeon anomaly, the dungeons in the region were still regarded as relatively low difficulty compared to the rest of the country. He questioned why an S-rank party would need the assistance of him and Fatina, saying that it simply did not make sense. Privately, Ark added to himself that if the matter only involved him, he might have accepted the risk. However, Fatina was with him, and he could not afford to make reckless decisions that might endanger her. Leonis silently observed that Ark was far sharper than he had expected. Cecilia smirked slightly and admitted that it was a fair question. She then began explaining their reasoning. First, regarding strength, she turned toward Veronica. Veronica nodded and revealed that Fatina possessed the Sword Saint skill. Veronica explained that Fatina was already around level 30, yet her level cap was 100, making her potential unquestionable. Both Ark and Fatina were visibly shocked by the accuracy of her statement. Cecilia explained that Veronica possessed the appraisal skill and had already identified their abilities the moment they entered the room. Veronica then continued her explanation, turning her attention toward Ark. She described him as the instant death mage, noting that despite being only level 1, his stats resembled those of a monster. Even after seeing the results a second time, she still found his strength absurdly overwhelming. Ark quietly muttered that appraisal was not a skill many people possessed and realized that hiding their true strength was no longer an option. Cecilia apologized and explained that the mission was extremely important to them as well. She then moved on to the second reason for recruiting them. According to her, the three of them had already attempted to reach the lower levels of the dungeon once before. However, midway through the expedition, they realized they lacked the necessary power and had no choice but to retreat. Leonis admitted that the failure had been embarrassing, while Veronica clenched her teeth and called it the greatest blunder of her life. Hearing this, Ark wondered if there was truly something overwhelmingly powerful hidden in the depths of the dungeon, something unrelated to the recent anomaly. Cecilia then explained the third and most important reason for choosing them. She stated that simply adding more strength to the party was easy, but what truly mattered was finding people they could trust. After returning from the northern region, she had heard about the attack on the town, and no matter whom she asked, the names of Ark and Fatina kept appearing in the stories. To her, anyone capable of inspiring that level of trust and admiration was someone worth seeing personally. Cecilia apologized once more and added that she had assumed Ark already understood that Instant Deathcoin was merely a nickname. Ark plainly replied that he had not known that. Fatina remarked that the nickname sounded incredibly unlucky. Cecilia laughed awkwardly before saying that those were the reasons they had chosen the two of them and asked them to seriously consider the request. Ark then asked one final question. Cecilia had referred to it as a job earlier, so he wanted to know who exactly had requested it. Cecilia answered carefully, saying that all she could reveal for now was that the request came from a certain someone. Ark fell silent. Inwardly, he realized that whoever this mysterious person was, they possessed enough influence to mobilize S-rank adventurers, offer an absurdly large payment, and still keep the details completely secret. The supposed trust Cecilia spoke of sounded more like confidentiality. Although he was genuinely interested in exploring the lower floors of the dungeon, the entire situation still felt suspicious to him. Leonis sighed and remarked that while he understood Cecilia was trying her best, her explanation was only making things sound more suspicious. Cecilia flinched at the blunt criticism. Veronica added that the situation sounded shady enough to make even her laugh. Panicking, Cecilia hurriedly told them both to stop. She insisted that she was not trying to scam them or feed them to monsters or anything like that. She claimed she was simply trying to act like a proper leader with dignity. Ark let out a quiet sigh before turning toward Fatina and asking for her opinion. Fatina replied that she personally had no problem accepting the offer. The three of them seemed like good people to her, and if anything dangerous happened, she would become his sword and protect him. Ark nodded. Truthfully, he was also interested in reaching the lower floors. Deep down, he felt that if he remained overly cautious forever, they would miss their opportunity. Although the mission was certainly risky, it might ultimately be worth it. Finally, Ark told Cecilia that they had decided to accept the request. Cecilia's eyes immediately filled with tears as she asked in disbelief if they were serious. She happily declared how relieved she was before quickly asking Ark to sign a form, just in case. Afterward, the meeting came to an end. Ark stood up and informed Cecilia that they would spend the next 2 days preparing their equipment and supplies before regrouping afterward. Cecilia agreed, but before they left, she added one final piece of information. The Verdant Labyrinth, she explained, is the true name of the Eastern Dungeon. Afterward, the day of the raid on the Verdant Labyrinth finally arrived. A swarm of hobgoblins rushed toward the party. Hobgoblins, a species superior to goblins in both intelligence and physique, inhabited the mid-floors of the labyrinth. Ark quickly warned everyone of their approach. Suddenly, a large monster appeared before him, but before it could make another move, it was instantly sliced in half. Leonis swiftly cut down the surrounding hobgoblins, defeating them with ease. With a grin, he declared that the monsters were merely small fry. Paladin Leonis possessed a maximum level of 80, and his skills were taunt and unyielding. Watching his performance, Fatina exclaimed in amazement, while Ark remarked that Leonis was the perfect tank. At that moment, the nearby wall crumbled as another monster burst through. It was a minotaur, a half-human beast belonging to a dungeon-dwelling tribe. With the head of a bull and a towering height of nearly 3 meters, its brute strength rivaled that of an ogre. The creature was ranked B. Leonis smirked as he recognized it as a minotaur. Meanwhile, Veronica began chanting a spell, calling upon light to become a shield and protect her ally. Veronica, a cleric with a maximum level of 60, possessed the skills Holy Magic and Appraisal. The Minotaur swung its massive axe, but Veronica's protection spell strengthened Leonis' defense, allowing him to block the attack with his shield. Leonis praised her support with admiration. At the same moment, Veronica activated her appraisal skill and quickly informed the party that the Minotaur's weakness was fire. Without hesitation, Cecilia chanted a spell, calling upon flames to pierce through and burn the enemy. Instantly, fire gathered around her sword as she unleashed Flame Lance upon the Minotaur, defeating it in a single strike. With the Minotaur gone, only the hobgoblins remained. Cecilia calmly turned her attention to them and chanted another spell, summoning ice to seize and freeze her enemies. Immediately, ice erupted from the ground beneath the hobgoblins, striking and defeating them instantly. Cecilia was a magic swordswoman with a maximum level of 80, wielding the skills All-Element Magic and Intermediate Swordsmanship. As Ark watched the battle unfold, he could not help but admire the party's flawless coordination, noting how perfectly each member maximized their abilities. He realized that this was how an S-rank party fought, clearing the mid-floors in no time at all. Fatina, equally impressed, commented on the party's remarkable harmony and asked whether Cecilia was both a swordswoman and a mage. Cecilia replied that she was essentially the party's sole striker, but thanks to her mastery of all-element magic, she could handle offense efficiently. Leonis added that as long as he broke through enemy lines while Veronica provided support, Cecilia could focus entirely on attacking. Fatina then held Veronica's hand in amazement, noticing that Veronica's gauntlets also functioned as a wand. Veronica casually replied that anything up to A-rank monsters was easy for their party to handle. Hearing this, Ark reflected to himself that the title of S-rank was not merely for show, as the party was effortlessly breezing through the mid-floors of the labyrinth. Ark then asked whether there was any kind of opponent that the three of them could not defeat. Cecilia replied that the next area was a safe zone and suggested that they continue the discussion there. Without delay, the group headed toward the area. After arriving, Cecilia pointed out traces left behind in the safe area and told everyone to sit wherever they liked. Leonis casually remarked that he would simply lean against the wall. As Ark looked around, he noticed that the upper safe area had also contained a water source, but this one appeared to be a properly maintained spring. The mysterious nature of the dungeon once again crossed his mind. Cecilia then began explaining the obstacle that had prevented them from reaching the lower layer, the gatekeeper, which was a golem. Golems were inorganic monsters animated through magic. They were usually made from earth or stone, though some were composed of materials originating from the dungeon itself. Their shape and toughness varied greatly, and because they felt no pain, they continued attacking until they were completely immobilized, making them extremely troublesome opponents. Hearing this, Ark muttered that golems in picture books always looked cute, but in reality they sounded terrifying. Fatina quickly replied that she already knew that. Leonis added that the materials found in dungeons were quite unique, being extremely durable and highly resistant to magic, making them exceptionally rare. Cecilia explained that since there had only been a single golem, she believed it could eventually be defeated with enough manpower. Leonis agreed, saying that in the end, there was no choice but to smash it into pieces. Meanwhile, Ark quietly reflected on the mention of rare materials, realizing that it could mean something important. Just then, someone suddenly gasped in shock. Cecilia was stunned upon hearing that instant death magic worked on skeletons. Ark confirmed it, admitting that he had always wondered why the ability affected creatures that were not even truly alive. Leonis remarked that this topic fell within Veronica's area of expertise and asked her to explain it. Veronica began by explaining that purification through holy magic could destroy undead, but it was not actually an exorcism or a process of sending souls to heaven. Instead, it simply removed the magic that possessed them. She noted that many people misunderstood this point. Fatina questioned whether it had nothing to do with ghosts at all. Veronica replied that it was different depending on the type of undead. Wraith-type monsters fit the common image because they were literally souls transformed into monsters. However, undead with physical bodies, such as skeletons and zombies, were merely corpses possessed by dungeon mana in order to repel intruders. She pointed out that people did not normally encounter zombies outside dungeons. Hearing this explanation, Ark agreed, realizing that there had not been any skeletons during the previous raid either. Veronica continued by explaining that even in tainted areas, the true problem was mana itself. Purification could drive the mana away temporarily, but it could not stop new mana from gathering again. She further speculated that instant death magic might function differently. Since undead destroyed by instant death did not revive, Perhaps the spell treated the mana stored within undead bodies as though it were life force itself. By applying the concept of death directly to that mana, the undead were permanently eliminated. Veronica admitted, however, that this was only her personal theory. Leonis jokingly remarked about Veronica's explanation, but before he could finish, Cecilia interrupted him. She wanted to confirm whether the same principle could work against golems as well. Veronica explained that golems were essentially puppets connected by invisible threads of mana. If the supply of mana could be severed completely, then instant death magic might indeed be effective against them. Cecilia's expression immediately brightened with hope. She admitted that this outcome was unexpected, but now they finally had a chance of overcoming the gatekeeper. Meanwhile, hearing Veronica's reasoning made Ark realize that his own abilities might truly work in that manner, though he admitted he still did not fully understand them himself. Bowing his head respectfully, he thanked Veronica, saying that her expert insight had been extremely helpful. Veronica responded with a proud grin, teasing that hearing praise from someone below her level felt rather satisfying. Cecilia immediately snapped at her smug remark. Afterward, the party continued pressing deeper into the dungeon, when suddenly a swarm of undead rushed toward them. Ark remarked that it was the perfect opportunity to test their theory since there were so many enemies gathered together. Fatina confidently declared that they could leave it to her. Taking her stance and gripping her sword firmly, she unleashed a single devastating slash. Everyone except Ark stared in complete shock, as he had already anticipated the result. The undead horde was annihilated instantly, leaving only a single survivor. Veronica stared wide-eyed in disbelief and demanded to know what had just happened. Seeing the remaining undead, Ark activated his instant death skill, Coffin, eradicating it immediately. Ark then explained that Fatina's sword had been forged from the bones of a shadow chimera, though none of them had expected it to produce such an overwhelming effect. Fatina cheerfully confirmed this, adding that the weapon even allowed her to fight from a distance, making it incredibly convenient. Cecilia sighed in admiration, acknowledging that while the sword itself possessed tremendous power, the ability to draw out its full potential was most likely the mark of a true swordmaster. She contrasted it with herself, lamenting that she was still only at the intermediate level of swordsmanship. Veronica carefully examined the undead that had been slain by Ark's instant death skill. Leonis asked her about the results of her inspection. Veronica confirmed that, just as expected, the undead's mana had completely vanished. She explained that under normal circumstances, undead creatures would simply pull themselves back together and continue moving after being damaged. Hearing this, Ark quietly muttered that their theory had now been confirmed. Cecilia added that golems concentrated their mana around their joint sections, and if that mana was removed, the entire body would collapse. Fatina excitedly exclaimed that this meant Ark would be the key to defeating the golem. Leonis confidently declared that he and Cecilia would focus on holding the creature back, leaving the crucial task to Ark. Cecilia nodded in agreement, remarking on how dependable he was. With their plan decided, the group pressed onward deeper into the dungeon. Cecilia periodically confirmed that the surrounding area was clear of enemies as they advanced. Eventually, they arrived at the very floor they had previously failed to conquer. Cecilia explained that the golem stood directly before the gate leading to the lower floors. Beyond the gate was an area resembling a shrine, and it seemed as though the golem existed solely to protect that sacred place. Ark quietly muttered to himself that the decisive moment had finally come. Realizing that the outcome of the battle depended heavily on him, he steeled his resolve, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. This time, they absolutely could not afford to lose. Leonis then asked Veronica whether she had fully stocked her potions and prepared herself mentally for the fight ahead. Veronica calmly replied that she intended to cast protective magic from the very beginning of the battle. Cecilia then addressed the group, declaring that this time they would successfully reach the lower floor and accomplish their objective. Ark briefly wondered what exactly she meant by objective, but before he could think further, a loud crashing sound suddenly echoed throughout the area. The source of the noise was none other than the hero Alan and his companions. Moving with overwhelming power, Alan charged straight toward the golem and struck one of its massive arms, shattering it instantly. Cecilia and the others froze in shock at the sudden appearance of the hero's party. At the same moment, Ark's eyes locked onto a familiar face among them. It was Lin, who stared back at him in surprise. Ark, Lin called out instinctively. In that very instant, Ark himself was equally stunned to see her there. Silence fell as tension rose between the two parties. Alan was the first to break it, wondering who stood before him before recognizing Cecilia. He greeted her casually and asked how long it had been since they last met. Cecilia recalled hearing rumors that Alan had been summoned to the country, though she questioned why he was here now. She replied that it had probably been since the tournament and remarked that his victory over the golem with barely a scratch was impressive. Alan casually brushed off the praise, saying it was only the middle floor of a countryside dungeon. He explained that his party had recently recruited some new adventurers, so they had stopped by to help them gain experience. Nearby, Lynn stared at Ark in visible shock. Alan then turned his attention back to Cecilia and asked why she was there, pointing out that an S-rank adventurer should have no reason to visit a place like this. Cecilia quickly grabbed Ark and whispered for him to play along for the moment. She then replied cheerfully that it was merely a coincidence. According to her, they also had a rookie with them and were assisting with guild training. Alan laughed, in understanding, and remarked that they were both having their own difficulties. Leonis joined in with an awkward laugh. Suddenly, Ark sensed something behind them. Fion had silently appeared at their backs and launched an attack, but Fatina immediately detected her presence and blocked the strike before it could connect. Fion looked both surprised and irritated. Fatina glared sharply at her, while Veronica stood speechless. Fion quickly stepped back. Leonis immediately asked Veronica if she was all right. In her mind, Veronica was overcome with shock, realizing that Fion had genuinely intended to kill them. Fion clicked her tongue in annoyance. Ark could hardly believe that he had failed to notice someone approaching from behind. Only Fatina's sharp senses had detected the attack in time. Cecilia angrily demanded to know what Alan meant by this. Alan calmly remarked that the beast girl must have been the sword master he had heard rumors about in town, admitting that he had not expected her to stop Fion's attack. He even praised Cecilia for recruiting someone so talented. Cecilia responded firmly that a minor scuffle between adventure parties was one thing, but attempted murder violated guild rules, and Alan should know that better than anyone. Even as she spoke, however, she felt that something was deeply wrong. Alan scoffed, making her even more uneasy. Then, without warning, Alan burst into loud laughter, causing everyone to stare at him in disbelief. He declared that both of them already knew why they had come there, and that the real question was who would stand in the other's way. Hearing this, Art became confused about their true objective. Were Alan and Cecilia both inside the verdant labyrinth for the same reason? He muttered in disbelief, wondering if they were serious. Veronica trembled as she warned Cecilia that something was wrong because their level caps did not match. Alan's level was 100. Both Leonis and Cecilia froze in shock. Meanwhile, Lynn approached Alan and questioned how he could do something like that. Before she could continue, Alan glared at her coldly and told her that it was not a big deal. If she did not understand, then she should keep her mouth shut. A cold sweat immediately broke across Lynn's body. She nervously nodded before collapsing onto the floor. Watching this unfold, Ark wondered whether Lynn truly had no idea what had happened. At that moment, Dorothea began chanting a spell, calling upon flames to explode and shatter her enemies. Fire gathered around her as the magic took shape. Realizing the danger, Cecilia immediately shouted for everyone to scatter. Dorothea released the spell, unleashing a massive explosion of fire toward them. Thick smoke filled the battlefield as Ark coughed from the burning air. When the smoke finally cleared, the surrounding area had been reduced to ruins by the blast. Eris stepped forward first. The Holy Knight's level had risen from 80 to 90, and her abilities included taunt, tenacity, and defense modifier. Although she claimed she held no personal grudge against them, she warned that she would show no mercy. Beside her stood the rogue Fion, whose level had also increased to 90. Her skills included daggers, agility, and concealment. She glared at Fatina with hostility and declared that Fatina had made her angry, promising to cut her to pieces. Meanwhile, Dorothea turned her attention toward Ark. The mage's level had risen beyond 80, and her abilities included fire magic, water magic, and magic amplification. She mocked Ark for daring to call himself a mage. Then Alan stepped forward. The Holy Knight had reached level 100, possessing skills such as swordsmanship, wind magic, and attack modifiers. Looking directly at Cecilia, he calmly declared that she could no longer reach him now. Cecilia could not help recalling their duel from years ago, but she realized that the Alan standing before her now was incomparably stronger than before. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when she sensed a chilling gust of wind. Before she could react, her body was violently slammed against the wall. Blood spilled from her mouth as the impact crushed into her. Fatina immediately called out to her in concern, but Fion coldly warned her not to look away and ordered her to focus on her opponent before launching another attack. At the same time, Leonis found himself locked in battle against Eris. Her overwhelming strength forced him backward, leaving him stunned that such power could come from someone with such a small frame. Realizing he was struggling, he called out to Veronica for support magic. Veronica shouted that she had already cast the spell, yet even with the enhancement, both of them continued to be overwhelmed by Eris's sheer strength. Watching the battle unfold, Ark realized the situation was growing worse. Everyone on their side was being pushed back. Dorothea noticed Ark observing the battlefield while avoiding her flames and remarked that he remained surprisingly calm under pressure. However, she questioned how he would deal with her next attack. Suddenly alarmed, Ark focused entirely on her. Dorothea cast Ice Needle, causing sharp spikes of ice to erupt violently from the ground. In an instant, Ark moved behind her, convinced that he was still faster and could knock her unconscious with a single strike. But just before his blow connected, Dorothea activated a defensive skill called Ice Dress. A barrier of ice formed around her. Smirking confidently, she asked Ark if that had hurt. Ark landed on the ground and clicked his tongue in frustration as a painful warning sensation spread through his hand. Nearby, Fatina and Fion continued their fierce clash. Fion suddenly sneered and told Fatina to look behind her before delivering a powerful strike that sent Fatina flying backward toward Ark's position. In that instant, Ark realized that the entire exchange had been carefully orchestrated as a trap. But by then, it was already too late. Alan raised his sword high into the air as lightning crackled violently around the blade. Activating his sword art skill, he unleashed a devastating slash. A powerful shockwave tore through the battlefield as Alan shouted the name of the technique. Sonic Blade. Ark stared at the incoming attack in alarm as the massive slash raced towards Cecilia and the others. Fatina cried out desperately as she shouted Ark's name. After the impact of Alan's attack, the battlefield was left in complete ruin. Thick dust filled the air as silence settled over the devastated area. Fion was the first to break the silence, angrily shouting at Alan that his attack had come far too close to hitting them. Alan calmly replied that he had simply trusted her ability to handle it. Fion snapped back in disbelief, demanding to know what he meant by that. Nearby, Dorothea complained irritably that the arguing was too loud. At the same time, Eris called out to Alan and pointed toward Ark and Fatina, who remained the only ones still standing despite their bodies being covered in wounds. Ark realized that he had only survived because of the protection spell and his unusually high HP. He quickly checked on the others and saw that they were all still alive, though none of them were capable of continuing the fight. Fatina had used her sword to shield herself from the attack, leaving her with the fewest injuries among them. As Ark analyzed the battle in his mind, he understood exactly what Alan's party had done. They had deliberately forced the group to split apart, making it seem as though they intended to defeat each opponent individually. In reality, it had all been a distraction designed to create an opening for a devastating group attack. Their party had been defeated before they could even take advantage of their teamwork and specialties. Ark realized with growing dread that Alan's party specialized in fighting other people. Unless someone fought with the intent to kill from the very beginning, surviving against them was nearly impossible. Even so, Ark hesitated at the thought of using instant death magic against humans. Without relying on that ability, his combat stats and skills were nowhere near enough to compete against them. The only thing he still possessed was his overwhelming amount of mana. Calling out to Fatina, Ark ordered her to use Magic Breaker with everything she had. Although confused, Fatina immediately agreed. Alan remarked that their survival had merely been luck and questioned whether they truly still intended to continue fighting. According to him, there was no need for them to keep resisting. At that moment, Lynn desperately called out to Ark, begging him to stop and run away instead. Hearing her voice, Alan suddenly realized something. He glanced toward Ark and remarked that he had nearly forgotten that Ark was that trash. The moment Lynn looked into Alan's eyes, fear ran through her entire body. Ark stared back into those same eyes and realized that this was precisely why he had been reborn, to stand against people like him. Without hesitation, Ark activated his insanity skill. Dark shadows instantly erupted from the ground as a thick miasma spread across the battlefield. Fion gasped in shock, while Dorothea looked around in confusion. Alan's expression twisted with anger as he realized the miasma had paralyzed him. Meanwhile, Ark continued sustaining the insanity skill, rapidly consuming his mana in order to maintain the field. Fatina stared at him in shock and asked what exactly this power was. Ark quickly explained that it was similar to the chimera from before, then shouted for her to move. As long as his mana lasted, he could continue weakening their enemies. He urged Fatina to seize the opportunity and attack, reminding her that she was the only one still capable of moving freely. At the same time, Lynn wondered why she herself remained unaffected by the miasma. Then Alan suddenly spoke in a cold, menacing voice, warning Ark not to underestimate him. Despite the thick miasma weakening his body, Alan forced himself to move. The moment Ark sensed it, a feeling of alarm surged through him. He immediately realized what Alan intended to do. If Alan unleashed that attack again, there would be no second chance for them to survive. Alan coldly declared that it was over. At that very moment, Fatina moved on pure instinct. Her swordmaster skill had already completely analyzed the ultimate sword technique Alan was preparing to unleash. Unlike the imitation she had used earlier, this time it was a genuine reproduction of the technique itself. Fatina swung her sword with tremendous force, releasing a devastating slash. Alan's eyes widened in shock. In that instant, he realized his mistake. He had failed to finish the battle with a single decisive blow, and that hesitation had cost him victory. Alan screamed in disbelief as Fatina shouted the name of the technique. Sonic Blade. The powerful slash tore through the battlefield and struck Alan along with his companions. As a sword master, Fatina had perfectly copied Alan's finishing move after witnessing it only once. When the attack ended, Ark stared at her in astonishment and asked if the technique she had just used was truly what he thought it was. Fatina herself looked confused and admitted that she could not fully explain it. Somehow, she had simply known how to perform the move. Ark shook his head in amazement, remarking that her skill continued to surprise him every single time. Meanwhile, Alan and the others collapsed unconscious onto the ground, their bodies covered in wounds. Only Lin remained standing. She stared blankly at the scene before her, trembling as she quietly whispered in confusion about what had just happened. Ark glanced toward her and quickly instructed Fatina to check on the others. Fatina immediately agreed and rushed to help their injured companions. Once Fatina had left, Ark found himself uncertain about what he should say to Lin. Part of him wondered whether he should simply allow her to make her own decision. After a brief moment of hesitation, Ark finally called out to her. Still trembling, Lin slowly turned toward him and softly spoke his name. Ark was about to say something, but he stopped himself. Shaking his head, he instead muttered that at least she was safe. Before he could continue, Alan suddenly moved. Despite his injuries, he grabbed Lin and pulled her close, taking her hostage. Ark's eyes widened in shock as Alan threatened that if Ark made even a single move, he would kill her. Alan threatened Ark not to move, warning that if he did, Lin would be killed. Ark gritted his teeth in frustration as Alan ordered him to stay quiet and stay out of the matter. Obeying for the moment, Ark remained still while Fatina looked at him with concern. Ark demanded that Alan release Lin, questioning whether this was truly the behavior of an S-rank hero. Alan immediately silenced him, furiously reminding Ark that he was nothing but trash who should never interfere with his ambitions. As Ark watched Alan, he wondered why the hero had abandoned his facade and pushed matters this far. Was the reason they had come to the labyrinth truly so important? Yet Ark forced himself to focus on the immediate problem, saving Lin. He considered using the insanity area again, but doubted whether he could activate it in time or if he even had enough mana remaining. Instant death crossed his mind as another option, but he quickly dismissed it, fearing that Lin might be caught in its effect as well. Meanwhile, Lin questioned why Ark was trying so desperately to save her. At that moment, Cecilia suddenly spoke and told Alan to stop, insisting that the children knew nothing. Fatina turned toward her in shock, realizing she had regained consciousness. Cecilia apologized to Ark and Fatina, explaining that it would have been safer if they had never learned the truth. She added that Lin had not been told anything either. Cecilia then revealed that the reason Alan's group had come to the Verdant Labyrinth was to obtain a key hidden deep within its lower levels. When Ark asked what the key was, Cecilia explained that it was an artifact possessing tremendous power. Alan's party had been gathering such keys under King Krisha's orders. She had believed they were still clearing dungeons in the north, and wondered why they were already here. Alan laughed mockingly at her confusion and pointed out that she should have noticed their levels already. Cecilia muttered to herself as realization slowly dawned upon her. In disbelief, she whispered that it could not be true. Smirking proudly, Alan confirmed her suspicion and revealed that he already possessed the Aqua Key. According to Alan, the key's power was extraordinary. It removed the world's fixed level cap and allowed its wielder to ascend to unimaginable heights. He proclaimed that it was the power to rewrite the rules of the world itself. If a single key could grant such a miracle, then obtaining both the Verdant Key and the Ember Key would make him godlike. Ark questioned whether this was not all part of King Krisha's orders. Alan dismissed the king entirely, declaring that he no longer cared about the old fool's schemes. He shouted that he would kill anyone who stood in his way. Hearing this, Ark could not help but wonder what had happened to Alan. Had he always harbored such overwhelming ambition, or had the power consumed him completely and stripped away his humanity? Suddenly, Alan cried out in pain as his body convulsed violently. Ark stared at him in confusion while Alan staggered and demanded to know what was happening. In that instant, Lin slipped free from Alan's grasp. Without hesitation, Ark rushed toward her. At the same time, Alan's body began to glow. A key emerged from within him and floated into the air. Moments later, the ground started shaking violently. Cecilia gasped, wondering if an earthquake was occurring inside the dungeon itself. Then the ground beneath them shattered. Ark sprinted toward Lin as fast as he could, reaching out desperately for her hand. He managed to catch it just as the floor completely collapsed beneath them. Together, they plunged downward into the abyss as everyone around them was swallowed by the darkness. As they hit the ground, Lin realized that Ark had used his mantle to cushion her fall. After picking the mantle back up, Ark calmly explained that the floor had suddenly collapsed beneath them, causing them to fall into an unknown area. However, Lin shook her head, making it clear that wasn't what she meant. Tears streamed down her face as she questioned why he was helping her at all. She could not understand why someone she had once abandoned was now risking himself to save her. Ark casually answered that he simply did not want to see his childhood friend die. Hearing those words, Lin's attention shifted to his injured arm, and concern quickly spread across her face. She told him to stay still because the wound looked severe, but Ark brushed it off, saying it was just the result of their fall. Lin immediately pointed out that he had injured himself while protecting her. Without hesitation, she cast healing magic, and the injury on Ark's arm vanished instantly. Staring at it in amazement, Ark muttered that the high priest's holy magic truly was incredible. Lin trembled slightly before calling him an idiot. Ark merely replied with a quiet, while thinking to himself that Lin had also protected everyone earlier and that she did not deserve to die for their sake either. He then admitted that even if things could never go back to the way they once were, that was fine. Hearing that, Lin silently cried. Ark continued by saying that escaping the place was their top priority for now, so they should put everything else aside and work together. Lin quietly nodded in agreement. After a brief silence, Lin asked about the strange magic that had stopped her companions earlier. She wondered why it had not affected her as well. Ark explained that his insanity skill could be deflected under certain conditions by a magic breaker. Since Lin possessed the goddess's blessing, Fatina likely assumed the skill would not affect her because of a form of holy resistance. Lin was stunned that Ark had thought that far ahead during the chaos. In comparison, she had only stood there in confusion, unable to keep up with his judgment. As they continued walking, Ark suggested that since they had fallen downward, they should search for a direction they could climb. He also noted that if they discovered another large hole nearby, there was a chance someone else had fallen there too. Lin nodded and agreed. While moving through the area, Ark noticed wooden structures scattered everywhere around them. This layer looked completely different from the upper floors. Suddenly, Lin spotted someone in the distance and gasped in shock. Eris turned toward them with surprise, while nearby Alan sat on the ground, badly wounded and struggling to breathe. Without hesitation, Eris begged them for help. She admitted they did not deserve assistance, but their potions were no longer enough. Desperately, she pleaded for Lin to heal Alan with her magic. Alan weakly told her that was enough. Eris suddenly fell silent and turned toward Alan. With a firm expression, Alan declared that they were enemies now, and he refused to disgrace himself by begging for help. Eris immediately protested, warning him that if he stayed in his current condition, he would die. Lin instinctively stepped forward, intending to help, but froze when Alan suddenly shouted for Eris to stop. Struggling to breathe, he repeated through clenched teeth that she needed to stop. Watching the exchange, Ark thought to himself that words alone would not solve anything. He lifted his gaze and noticed another enormous hole nearby. He had no idea how far apart everyone had been scattered, but Fatina and the others might have fallen somewhere close as well. At that moment, a familiar voice echoed through the area. Fatina called out in relief after finally finding them, while Leonis quickly asked Ark if he was all right. After spending several moments confirming everyone's safety, the group began discussing their situation. Ark pointed out that this place was clearly different from the floor they had been on before and asked whether anyone knew anything about it. Cecilia explained that at first she believed they had simply fallen to a lower floor, but the atmosphere of the area felt far too strange to be an ordinary dungeon lair. She then asked if anyone had noticed that ever since arriving, they had not encountered a single monster. Ark silently agreed with her observation. The place was unnaturally quiet, with no sign of life anywhere around them. Yet despite the silence, it did not feel like a safe zone either. Meanwhile, Fatina gently held Lin's hands and told her how relieved she was to see her safe. Lin quietly thanked her. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a voice stating that the place they had entered was the deep layers. Everyone turned toward Alan. Smirking faintly, he declared that there was no mistake about it. They were in the deep layers of the dungeon. He further explained that if they had simply fallen there normally, they would have died, meaning the strange events surrounding them were all connected somehow. Cecilia narrowed her eyes and remarked that Alan sounded as though he knew a great deal about the matter. Alan started to confirm it, but before he could continue, a violent coughing fit interrupted him. Eris quickly urged him to stop talking. She then explained that they had experienced something similar before in the northern dungeon known as the Aqua Labyrinth. Just before the anomaly occurred there, she had seen a burst of light emerge from Alan's body. Ark began to point out that the previous incident had not happened from a middle layer like this one, but before he could finish speaking, a deafening roar suddenly echoed through the area. Alan calmly stated that it had arrived. In the next instant, enormous branches erupted violently from the ground. Ark shouted in shock, demanding to know what it was, while Leonis stared in horror as realization dawned on him. Everyone froze where they stood. A gigantic creature silently rose before them, and with a single step, the ground beneath it cracked apart. Alan smirked faintly before revealing its identity. It was the ruler of the deep layers, the guardian of the verdant abyss.